Today we're reading from Dorfman and Mallart's book, How to Read Donald Duck, Imperialist Ideology in the Disney Comic. And this is from the preface to the English edition. This book was first published in Spanish. To say that this book was burnt in Chile should not come as a surprise to anyone. Hundreds of books were destroyed and thousands more prohibited and censored. It was written in the middle of 1971, in the middle of the Chilean revolutionary process. Copper had been rescued, the land was being returned to the peasantry, the whole Chilean people were recovering the industries that during the 20th century had been the means of enrichment for Mr. Rockefeller, Grace, Guggenheim, and Morgan. Because this process was intolerable to the United States government and its multinational corporations, it had to be stopped. They organized a plan which at the time was suspected and since has been confirmed by Mr. Kissinger, Ford, and Colby to have been directed and financed by the United States intelligence services. Their objective was to overthrow the constitutional government of Chile. To realize their objective, an invisible blockade was imposed. Credits were denied, spare parts purchased for industrial machinery were not sent, and later the Chilean state bank accounts in the U.S. were blocked, and an embargo preventing the sale of Chilean copper throughout the world was organized. There were, however, two items which were not blocked: planes, tanks, ships, and technical assistance for the Chilean armed forces, and magazines, TV serials, advertising, and public opinion polls for the Chilean mass media, which continued for the most part to be in the hands of a small group which was losing its privileges. To maintain them with those of the U.S., their media prepared the climate for the bourgeois insurrection, which finally materialized some years later on the 11th of September, 1973. Each day, with expert U.S. advice, in each newspaper, each weekly, each monthly magazine, each news dispatch, each movie, and each comic book, their arsenal of psychological warfare was fortified. In the words of General Pinochet, the point was, quote, to conquer the minds, end quote, while in the words of Donald Duck in the magazine Dislandia, published in December 1971, coinciding with the first mass rallies of native fascism, the so-called March of the Empty Pots and Pans, the point was to, quote, restore the king. But the people did not want the restoration of the king, nor of the businessman. The popular Chilean cultural offensive, which accompanied the social and economic liberation, took multiple forms: wall paintings, popular papers, TV programs, motion pictures, theater, songs, literature. In all areas of human activity, with differing degrees of intensity, the people expressed their will. Perhaps the most important arm of this offensive was the work of the state publishing house, Quimantu, a word meaning sunshine of knowledge in the language of the Chilean Machupe Indians. In 2.5 years, it published 5 million books, twice the amount that had been published in all of Chile during the previous 70 years. In addition, it transformed the content of some of the magazines it had inherited from before the popular unity government and created new ones. It is in this multifaceted context, with the people on the march to cultural liberation, a process which also meant criticizing the mass cultural merchandise exported so profitably by the U.S. into the Third World, that How to Read Donald Duck was generated. We simply answered a practical need. It was not an academic exercise. For the Mad Dog Warriors on that September 11th, there were no paintings on the walls. There were only enormous stains which dirtied the city in memory. They, using the fascist youth brigades, whitewashed all the signing, many-colored walls of the nation. They broke records, murdered singers, destroyed radios and printing presses, imprisoned and executed journalists, so that nothing would be left to remind anybody of anything about the struggle for national liberation. But it was not enough to clean these cultural stains from the street. The most important task was to eliminate all those who bore the stain inside themselves: the fighters, workers, peasants, employees, students, and patriotic soldiers, to eliminate these creators of a new life, to eliminate this new life which grew, and for all that we created. This book, conceived for the Chilean people and our urgent needs, produced in the midst of our struggle, is now being published far from Chile in the uncle land of Disney, behind the barbed wire network of ITT. Mr. Disney, we are returning your duck, feathers plucked and well roasted. Look inside, you can see the handwriting on the wall, our hands still writing on the wall, Donald, to go home. This is written in 1975. And then this from David Kunzel's introduction. The names of the presidents change. That of Disney remains. 46 years after the birth of Mickey Mouse, 8 years after the death of his master, Disney's may be the most widely known North American name in the world. He is arguably the century's most important figure in bourgeois popular culture. He has done more than any single person to disseminate around the world certain myths upon which that culture has thrived, notably that of an innocence, supposedly universal, beyond place, beyond time, and beyond criticism. The myth of U.S. political innocence is at last being dismantled, and the reality which it masks lies in significant areas exposed to public view. But the great American dream of cultural innocence still holds a global imagination in thrall. The first major breach into the Disney of this dream was made by Richard Schickel's The Disney Version, The Lifetimes and Commerce of Walt Disney, the book How to Read Donald Duck.
This is the Thom Hartmann Program.
Well, greetings, my friends, patriots, lovers of democracy, truth, and justice, believers in peace, freedom, and the American way. We've got a lot coming up on the program today. In our third hour, I've got a geeky science for you. Adding color to your plate may lower your risk of cognitive decline. It's a fascinating research study that just came out. In our second hour, I want to get into the nightmare fantasy shared by the whole Vanilla Ice right-wing white supremacist movement. And what happens when you ban critical race theory in our schools? Michigan is starting to find out, and it's not pretty. In our second hour, I want to dig into my rant today over at HartmannReport.com. Trump's shadow cabinet is part of his ongoing coup. It turns out that sedition and treason are pretty profitable as the coup rolls on. But to start out, Dr. Eric Feigl-Ding is with us, the epidemiologist and health economist. He's an adjunct senior fellow with the American Federation of Scientists, formerly a faculty member and researcher at the Harvard Medical School and the Harvard T.H. Chan School of Public Health. You can follow him on Twitter, which is where I just hang on his every pronouncement, at Dr. Eric Ding, E-R-I-C-D-I-N-G, D-R-E-R-I-C-D-I-N-G, over on Twitter. One of the must-follow Twitter threads, or whatever you call it, posters out there. Dr. Feigl-Ding, welcome back to the program. It's great to have you with us. Can you describe for us the difference between something being pandemic and something being endemic? Because it seems to me that coronavirus is on the verge of becoming endemic, unless I'm misunderstanding that word.
Right. Thank you for having me. I think epidemic and pandemic are obviously talks about the rising of a new virus, a pandemic being a global version of a new virus. But the issue with endemic means it's been with us for so long that it just lives with us. We just can't,
sort of like the
absolutely
flu.
Can't eradicate it. But usually it means it has like a low level of seriousness and severity. Like we have endemic chickenpox. Kids eventually get chickenpox. Endemic common cold, and usually these kind of things. I would not describe the SARS-CoV-2 as endemic yet. It's very much a brand new virus, and it is extremely deadly that we should not just live with it at the same time.
Well, I guess my larger question then is, we're all envisioning, or we were prior to the Delta variant, a time when enough of us were vaccinated that we could just, pull the plug on this thing and declare it like we did with polio and smallpox. It's gone. And it certainly doesn't seem like that's going to be the case. Even though it now has been, at least for those people who are vaccinated, reduced from something that's going to kill you or put you in the hospital down to something that gives you a bad head cold. But how do you see this shaping out with where we are at now in the United States?
Yeah, I think before the Delta variant, there was a really good chance we could eradicate it. But with the rise of Delta variant, it's going to create a different type of problem, because the Delta variant, there's data that not only does it circulate in minks, but 50% of all wild deer in Michigan are now infected.
Wow.
And and if it's just deer that's infected, many other animals like rodents and other animals or raccoons potentially are someday as well. But the issue is because it's so much more contagious, and now it's hard to stop. And if it has an animal reservoir to live in,
particularly dogs or cats,
eradicating in humans means animals that could potentially come back and infect us, even if we eradicate it from animals. And the head of eradication for smallpox, Dr. Larry Brilliant, says it's when you have a heavy animal reservoir infection, you can't eradicate it anymore. So the problem is, are we reaching that state that because it's so contagious that we can't eradicate? It's not. I would not call it endemic yet, because endemic by definition means low severity and living with us for a long time. I don't know if this is going to be a low severity thing. Hopefully, we will eventually get to a point where it's low severity. But in India, don't forget, India, the Delta variant, also formerly known as the Indian double mutant variant, it killed about 1 to 3 million people in 2 months. So this is something that we cannot just live with. This is something that, as on the human scale and toll, we should not ever live with. But at this rate currently, it could, with so many vaccine hesitant people, it could burn through the forest.
Yeah.
You shouldn't live with if you're in a forest, you shouldn't live with forest fires. You still have to put them out. But the problem is, if you don't stop it with anything else, it's going to burn through the forest until there's nothing left. And that is the calamity that we're seeing in some countries that's now faced with the Delta variant on an astronomical scale.
If this virus has mutated in a way that allows it to easily jump into other mammals, you mentioned half the deer in Michigan now have it, and there's a lot of deer in Michigan. I grew up in Michigan. How far away are we from it jumping to dogs and cats? And then if it jumps into feral dog and cat populations, this becomes a reservoir that echoes back against humans constantly. Yeah,
and the bad news is it has already jumped into dogs and cats. That's already been proven. And the issue can it jump back? We technically don't have any proof that it can jump back to us. But lack of proof is not proof that it doesn't do it. It happens.
Right.
We know it jumps into minks, and we have proof it jumps back from minks to humans on mink farms. This is where you hear all the millions of minks infected, and we've actually proven that it jumps into minks, mutates in minks, and jumps back into humans with the new mutated form. That's already been proven. And the other thing is, previously, the old Wuhan version 1.0 could not infect mice. It could not, because unless the mice had a certain receptor, it just could not infect mice. Guess what? And according to the studies a couple months ago, it doesn't. Alpha variant, which is the UK variant that developed over the wintertime, it doesn't even need the special gene that the old Wuhan version needed. Now it can directly infect mice. If it infects mice and rats, that this is going to come back to us.
So it doesn't require the...
We've seen it. So basically the writing's on the wall that it could jump back to us. And the question is, eventually will it become by itself mutated so mild that we can live with it? Or is it going to be that we're going to need a burn through before the world hits that level? And going through a burn through in which the forest gets burned to all fires before the wildfire ends is not the outcome that we want in the society. But at the stage where we're headed in Florida and many other places where there's no masks, very low vaccinations, that's where we're headed. And that is the really scary future. Burn
through meaning lots and lots of people dying, getting sick and dying. which raises the question. There's this new variant, the Lambda variant. I was reading about this in Nature yesterday, that they believe that it is more deadly and perhaps more contagious than even the Delta variant. What do we know about that? Oh, hang on just a minute. I'm sorry, we just hit a break. I thought we still had a couple of minutes. Can you hang on? Can you stick around with us, Dr. Feigl-Ding? Okay, great. We're talking with Dr. Eric Feigl-Ding, the epidemiologist and health economist with the American Federation of Scientists, formerly a faculty member and researcher at Harvard Medical School. Dr. Eric Ding on Twitter. We will be right back with Dr. Feigl-Ding. Stick around.
This is the Thom Hartmann Program.
We're talking coronavirus in general, COVID specifically, with Dr. Eric Feigl-Ding right after this. So, Dr. Feigl-Ding, we're to continue our conversation, and we're still on the air. Tell me about what you know about Lambda, about this Lambda variant.
And the Lambda variant is a new variant. It's still not a variant of concern yet. It's still a variant of investigation. And the question is, how dangerous is it? We really don't know. It's so early. We don't have enough clinical studies on Lambda. Lambda is one of those big question marks. But it has the hallmarks of potentially a really dangerous one because it has lots of bad mutations. It's been found in several countries as well. Whether or not it's faster than Delta, there's one way to know. If it starts replacing Delta with increasing frequency, then you'll know it's faster than Delta.
So it's just Darwinian.
It was faster than any other virus because it was replacing all the other strains like wildfire.
Yeah, so
we haven't seen Lambda to replace Delta at a high risk pace yet.
Yeah, so it's just essentially a Darwinian process. Where is the Lambda right now? Has it popped up in the United States yet?
It has popped up in the U.S., but it's very rare. We don't have a good assessment. It's in many countries around the world. But again, there's many variants that will pop up. It has not been rated as a variant of concern. There's a variant of under investigation, variants of interest. Those are pop up, dime a dozen. But for it to become a variant of concern, we have to see some real smoking gun, see some, fire in the theater kind of moments before we shout on it. And that's in certain ways, that is a very subjective thing. Like WHO declared Delta a variant of concern back in early May, first week of May. US CDC didn't declare it a variant of concern until mid-June, June 15th, a whole month and a half. And I think we lost a lot of time containing Delta because WHO said it's bad. WHO says, put your mask on. And CDC is like, nah, we don't need to do that. It's not a variant of concern. No, we don't need to do that. The WHO has a different standard of care than we do. And CDC in certain ways hand-waved for an extremely long amount of time. And now here we are. So I'm obviously on the precautionary principle side, but I think, precautionary with data. And I haven't seen really that much data on Lambda yet. So let's be patient. Let's not jump the gun. It's not like we don't have a wildfire right now, and it's Delta. The same thing that controls Delta would control Lambda. But we just have to. Our main problem, it's kind of like fruits and vegetables. Everyone knows you need to eat your fruits and vegetables. Most people don't eat their fruits and vegetables, right? Everyone who smokes knows smoking is bad, but they still smoke. A lot of this comes down to behavior and behavioral economics, not just epidemiology. And this is why I'm a behavioral health economist as well, because I know that in the end, in society, you need carrots, and sometimes you need sticks to make sure people do what they need to protect themselves. And right now, we need to start using sticks more to really stop the epidemic.
Yeah, I'm with you. Hang on for just 1 minute, and we'll be back with you on the other side here, Dr. Feigl-Ding. If you can stick around for maybe another 5 minutes or so. Great. We're talking with Dr. Eric Feigl-Ding. You can follow him on Twitter at Dr. Eric Ding. Missed my opening rant today? It's usually published over at HartmannReport.com, where you can read it and share it with your friends for free. Check it out, HartmannReport.com. You know, there's so much news coming out of the Trump administration, so much corruption, so many crimes. Oh, you know, now they're letting people kill endangered species. Now they're selling off, you know, the Arctic National Wildlife Preserve, refuge rather, to big oil companies. Oh, now they're they're authorizing pesticides that we know cause birth defects and damage to children. It's just, you know, step after step after step, that it's so easy to forget that back in July of 2020, it was reported that Jared Kushner and Mike Pence's nephew, John Pence, created a couple of LLCs, American-Made Media Consultants Corporation, that took $617 million of Trump campaign cash, and nobody knows where it went. I'm telling you, these guys are professional grifters. We need to keep an eye on it. There's a whole rant about it over at thomhartmann.com for supporters of our program. And welcome back. We're talking with Dr. Eric Feigl-Ding, the epidemiologist and former faculty member and researcher at the Harvard Medical School, about the coronavirus. Speaking of Lambda, you know, you mentioned that the Lambda variant, you know, is just popping up in a few places. It hasn't been identified as a variant of concern. We still need to learn more about it. But looking at viruses and their evolution through a kind of a neo-Darwinian lens, it seems like, on the one hand, a virus would always want to, a deadly virus, would always want to mutate in the direction of becoming less and less deadly, so it would have more and more hosts and a greater chance of transmission. Yet that's not what happened with smallpox. Or maybe it is. I guess smallpox wiped out Native American societies in ways that were way beyond how it did European societies who had been living with it for 500 or 1,000 years. Clarify that for me. How do viruses evolve in relationship to how deadly and how contagious they might be, and how might that inform us in expectations with Lambda and Omega, and, you know, going all the way through to Omega, going forward with new variants with regard to this virus?
You know, the old saying was that viruses will become less deadly. That's not always true. Like with SARS coronavirus, it's really been sobering for a lot of the virologists who've said that previously. I think there is truth that a virus can't be too deadly. Like, for example, Ebola and some of the other, like MERS, Ebola had a 50% mortality. MERS, which is Middle Eastern Respiratory Syndrome coronavirus, like 6-7 years ago, was about 35% fatality. If you got infected, your fatality was 35%. That's a little bit too high for it to become a pandemic. The perfect virus for pandemic is extremely contagious. It kills a decent number of people, but not enough that it creates a braking system. And if you're at 35% mortality, it creates a braking system against it spreading. You need it to be asymptomatic enough and mild enough people that it keeps going, but severe enough in the remainder that it really cuts them down. In terms of way, that's the combination of SARS-CoV-2. And Wuhan was, you know, perfect at that moment because no one had any immunity. It was like basically a virus that arrived in, you know, like just like the Europeans brought it to the New World. No one had immunity, and it ripped through the population. Now we obviously have some immunity to say from a combination of natural immunity but plus vaccines. But then this gives way to Delta, which is much more contagious, more severe, but also very one-dose vaccine evasive. You know, what we used to have, one dose used to be like 75% efficacy. Now one dose is less than 30%, 18%, in fact, for AstraZeneca one dose in one study. And, of course, two-dose, very evasive now. No longer 95% efficacy. We're talking about 60, 70%, and one study showed 40% efficacy. That is how you survive, and not necessarily being more deadly, but more evasive, but still keeping your, deadly / more severe properties.
You being the virus.
Crossing into 35%. But that, you know what, if we had a 35%, it would be like bubonic plague bad. But in certain ways, even at the 2% CFR that we are seeing, 1%, the actual infection fatality ratio, including the asymptomatic, was about 0.6. That is enough to do everything that is done to us in the last year.
Wow.
And now Delta variant is 4 times more severe among the unvaccinated. 4 times. As in, if one person went to the hospital before last year per capita, 4 times that now for Delta. And this is where Delta has taught us it is more severe, and it is the 2.0 pandemic virus. And we cannot rely on just being, it will become less severe over time. I think we should just be really, really cognizant. This is still going to be with us for quite a while and very dangerous.
Yeah. We have a little less than a minute before we're going to hit a hard break here. It seems to me like the CDC has gone gun shy. You mentioned how, they missed a few months of time with the Delta variant. And a lot of our listeners are saying, we never should have stopped masking, for example. What are your thoughts on that?
Oh, yeah. I've been saying that forever. The moment CDC announced it in May, I was shouting at the rooftops. I was shouting on CBS News that CDC made a grave mistake. Now everyone says, oh, yeah, CDC mistake. Oh, back then, a lot of people didn't want to say that. But I've been saying CDC's been making a grave mistake from the very beginning. And it's because we know asymptomatic transmission's been there. Now, Singapore data shows there's asymptomatic transmission, there's mild transmission among the vaccinated. The proof was there in the pudding. It just, if you had looked for it, it was there. And CDC just kind of like put its head in the sand like an ostrich and just ignored all those data. And I think that's the gravest
Not a good
concern,
thing.
and that's why it was a big mistake.
Dr. Eric Feigl-Ding, you follow him on Twitter at Dr. Eric Ding. Hang on just a second.
Listening to the Thom Hartmann Program. Call 202-808-9925.
Dr. Feigl-Ding, thanks so much for dropping by. It's always great talking with you. Thank you. We'll be back. It's coming up on 28 minutes past the hour. For the Thom Hartmann Book Club today, it's Waking the Witch, Reflections on Women, Magic, and Power by Pam Grossman. This is from the introduction. Witches have always walked among us, populating societies and storyscapes across the globe for thousands of years. From Circe to Hermione, from Morgan Le Fay to Marie Laveau, the witch has long existed in the tales we tell about ladies with strange powers who can harm or heal. And although people of all genders have been considered witches, it's a word that is now usually associated with women. Throughout most of history, she has someone to fear, an uncanny other who threatens our safety or manipulates reality for her own mercurial purposes. She's a pariah, a persona non grata, a boogie woman to defeat and discard. Although she's often been deemed a destructive entity, in actuality, a witchy woman has historically been far more susceptible to attack than an inflictor of violence herself. As with other terrifying outsiders, she occupies a paradoxical role in cultural consciousness as both vicious aggressor and vulnerable prey. Over the past 150 years or so, however, the witch has done another magic trick by turning from a fright into a figure of inspiration. She is now as likely to be the heroine of your favorite TV show as she is its villain. She might show up in the form of your Wiccan coworker,
or the beloved musician who gives off a sorcerous vibe in videos or on stage. There's also a chance that she is you, and that witch is an identity you've taken upon yourself for any number of reasons, heartfelt or flippant, public or private. Today, more women than ever are choosing the way of the witch, whether literally or symbolically. They're floating down catwalks and sidewalks in gauzy black clothing and adorning themselves with Pinterest-worthy pentagrams and crystals. They're filling up movie theaters to watch witchy films and gathering in back rooms and backyards to do rituals, consult tarot cards, and set life-altering intentions. They're marching in the streets with Hex the Patriarchy placards and casting spells each month to try to constrain the commander-in-chief. Year after year, articles keep proclaiming it's the season of the witch, as journalists try to wrap their heads around the mushrooming witch trend. And all of this begs the question, why? Why do witches matter? Why are they seemingly everywhere right now? What exactly are they? And why the hell won't they go away? I get asked such things over and over, and you would think that after a lifetime of studying and writing about witches, as well as hosting a witch-themed podcast and being a practitioner of witchcraft myself, my answers would be succinct. In fact, I find that the more I work with the witch, the more complex she becomes. Hers is a slippery spirit. Try to pin her down, and she'll only recede further into the dark, deep wood. I do know this for sure, though. Show me your witches, and I'll show you your feelings about women. The fact that the resurgence of feminism and the popularity of the witch are ascending at the same time is no coincidence. The two are reflections of each other. That said, this current witch wave is nothing new. I was a teen in the 1990s, the decade that brought us such pop culture as Buffy the Vampire Slayer, Charmed, and The Craft. Not to mention Riot Girls and third-wave feminists who taught me that female power could come in a variety of colors and sexualities. I learned that women could lead a revolution while wearing lipstick and combat boots, and sometimes even a cloak. But my own witchly awakening came at an even earlier age. Morganville, New Jersey, where I was raised, was a solidly suburban town, but it retained enough natural land features back then to still feel a little bit scruffy in spots. We had a small patch of woods in our backyard that abutted a horse farm, and the two were separated by a wisp of running water that we could cross via a plank of wood. When we were little, my older sister Emily and I would sometimes venture to the other side where we could feed the horses, an act that still scares me to this day, and pick fistfuls of clover. But the majority of our time was spent on our side of the stream, threading ourselves through the thicket of trees that served as our personal forest. In one corner of the yard, a giant puddle would form whenever it rained, surrounded by a border of ferns. We called this spot our magical place. That it would vanish and then reappear only added to its mystery. It was a portal to the unknown. These woods are where I first remember doing magic, entering that state of deep play where imaginative action becomes reality. I would spend hours out there creating rituals with rocks and sticks, drawing secret symbols in the dirt, losing all track of time. It was a space that felt holy and wild, yet still strangely safe. As we age, we're supposed to stop filling our heads with such nonsense. Unicorns are to be traded in for Barbie dolls, though both are mythical creatures to be sure. We lose our tooth fairies, walk away from our wizards. Dragons get slain on the altar of our youth. Most kids grow out of their magic phase. I grew further into mine. My grandma Trudy was a librarian at the West Long Branch Library, which meant I got to spend many a long afternoon lurking between the 001.9 and 135 Dewey Decimal sections, reading about Bigfoot and dream interpretation and Nostradamus. Waking the Witch by Pam Grossman. Our 1-hour free podcast recaps our show, and it's available wherever fine podcasts are found. And we have the full 3-hour podcast available over at thomhartmann.com if you want to really support our program. We have a new video up over at thomhartmann.com about conspiracy theories. Abby Richards came up with a kind of a hierarchy of conspiracies, maybe a variation on the old Maslow hierarchy. And it goes from
actual conspiracies to maybe this was a conspiracy, maybe not, we have questions, to this is kind of crazy stuff, but who knows, flying saucers, for example, to actual science denial, conspiracy theories that actually serve to promote the interests of a particular industry or wealthy individuals, to the totally crazy stuff, the flat earth, the reptilian overlords, and all that kind of conspiracy theories that can do tremendous damage. And, one of those being one of the conspiracy theories that, brought two Republicans into Congress this year. So anyhow, I lay the whole thing out with a new video for our supporters over at ThomHartmann.com. So Louise and I have some friends that we keep in touch with mostly by email and follow on Facebook. And last weekend, not this weekend that just ended, but the one before that, they took a short trip down to Phoenix. And when they came back, one of the two in the couple was feeling poorly, right? A little sick, a little head cold, just don't feel good. And I'm like, you've got breakthrough COVID. And they're like, yeah, I don't think so. And I'm like, well, you can buy these test kits now online for, real ones made by like Abbott Laboratories, the Binax one. They're like $20, $25 in that neighborhood. Amazon sells them and pretty much, any other, they're easy to find. And they sell them in drugstores too, if you want to walk into a drugstore. So why don't you get yourself tested? Because, if you do have a breakthrough infection, for the next 10 days, you really should isolate yourself because you can infect other people just as easily and just as readily as somebody who is not vaccinated. Even though, you're just having a head cold because you're vaccinated, if you came into contact with somebody who wasn't vaccinated, it could be a dangerous event for them. And they're like, well, we're just going to ride it out. And I'm wondering, has this happened to you and to people that you know? It seems like there's an area of, and one of the other comments that one of these people made was, I'm like, you could infect unvaccinated people and they could end up dead. And the response was a variation on, that's their choice by being unvaccinated. That's not my choice. Why am I having to worry about this? Yes, we'll wear masks when we go out, but why do we have to be the ones who are worried about people who chose not to get vaccinated? Why do we have to change our lives and go out and pay for test kits and things and quarantine ourselves and all this other stuff just because some ass doesn't, is believing Donald Trump and reading crazy stuff on Dr. Mercola's Facebook page and stuff like that. And, my answer to that, we didn't get into a big fight about this. A lot of this is kind of a debate going on in my own head. But my answer to that is humanity, right? We're all human beings here. We have, an obligation to each other, even the idiots among us. And, and a lot of the people who are reading Facebook and listening to Trump and watching Fox News, they're not evil people. They're not terrible people. Some of them are. Some of them are doing those things because it reinforces their white supremacist worldview and all the other stuff that goes along with being a Republican. But I have to believe that many of them are just people who got caught up in the moment. And it's like this couple in, I think it was in Georgia. They're all over the news right now. They've got 4 kids. They both just got intubated yesterday, which means either one of them might die. When you get intubated, that's like, about half of the people never come back from that because they have to make you unconscious or else your body will constantly try to reject this giant tube that they shove down all the way down into your lungs. And it's serious stuff, terrible stuff. And so, these people are openly, aggressively, or at least they were before they got intubated, begging their friends and their children and everybody that they know, take this thing seriously. So So what do we do? What do we do? Kirk in Lakeland, Florida. Hey, Kirk, what's on your mind today?
Tom, thank you for taking my call.
Sure.
I almost feel like it's a rant today that I want to partake in.
Go for it.
I'm a father of four. I run a small medical device distributorship out of Lakeland, Florida, and if you know anything, that's between Tampa and Orlando.
Mm-hmm.
And we're having this COVID outbreak, and so the reality, and it's a good segue with what you just talked about, which is that my reality is that these kids are supposed to go back to school in a couple of weeks. Our governor has kind of pushed off mask mandates, saying it's an individual responsibility. The other side of that is that one of my employees, actually her whole family, is suffering from COVID, from this variant. And so I want to talk about the economic impact of COVID-19 on the small business owner. I want to talk about my experience, too, is that I worked for a huge orthopedic manufacturer in 2018 and had a really big account that they just arbitrarily took away from me in 2019. And then in 2019 and into 2020, they won these sole source contract awards with CHS Hospital and HCA Hospital. And, basically because of the supply chain shortage, asking me to go into hospitals, to train staff, nurses, doctors, that staff to use this equipment. And, as a 1099 contractor for, it's one of the world's, there's two of the world's largest orthopedic manufacturers, this being one of them. They didn't offer I ended up selling them masks. This is the irony. They never sent me one back. They would send me into hospitals. I'd have to wear my own mask. About 6 months into the pandemic, they sent me a cloth mask and a 2-ounce bottle of hand sanitizer, saying with you every step of the way. And so my point is, listen, I'm so uptight and I'm frustrated, and I want to go back to what's going on right now in the pandemic too, which is that it goes back to your book on the secret history of hospitals, where right now in the medical device industry, I even sell COVID-19 test supplies. It's not like I'm trying to pander equipment, but the point of this is that we're having also this crisis where we have big private equity getting into healthcare. And so my analogy today, and I heard it said so well, was that, big private equity firms are buying allotments of gloves, masks, things like that hospitals need. And they're working it out with manufacturers way in advance. And so people like me, small business, really don't have access to that unless, again, I'm willing to partner up. So I'm always a fan of a solution to a problem. So my solution to the problem is I'm working on a co-op. I would really like to start my business as a co-op to be able to spread that. Mm-hmm. And that's one of the things that I offer to my employees it's right.
I'm with you, Kirk. I want to get more callers in here, so I'm going to move along. But did you make your main point? The point that you wanted to make?
Yes, it's a conundrum, and that again, if you'll address private equity in this too, it's just that again.
Private equity is ruining everything. I mean, they're buying newspapers and shutting them down. Local newspapers all over the United States. They're driving the real estate crisis. They're doing all kinds of terrible stuff. But Kirk, thank you for the call. James in Brooklyn, New York. Hey, James, what's up?
Yes, I'm calling in reference to the call that was placed on Saturday.
Okay, we weren't on the air on Saturday, so that must have been a best-of show. But in any case, what's up?
With that man, where you were asking about, he was a black man, and he was making the comparison with the shot that was given to.
Oh, the black guy who called in and said that he wasn't going to get the vaccine because of Tuskegee.
I called to confer with him because I feel the same. You were saying to him, well, what if you have cancer? Well, let's just go for a minute. You just got a $26 billion award for opiates, okay? And this award was for what? Because an opiate has spread. Well, who gives these opiates out to people? Doctors. Doctors give this. Who gave this syphilis to black men? in there, doctors.
No, actually, the Tuskegee experiment was black men who had gotten syphilis from having sex with people, and they told them that they were treating them, and they didn't treat them, which is just as terrible. But you know, I mean, where we were doing biological warfare was against Native Americans with smallpox before that. But James, you know, yes, medicine has a checkered history. This isn't part of it. This isn't part of it. You've got 300 million vaccines have been given to Americans. Nobody has died from any of the vaccines. 610,000 Americans have died from not having vaccines. 99.99% of hospitalizations are among people who are not vaccinated. And James, if you don't get a vaccine, you're taking your own life in your own hands, and that is crazy.
There's been no research to show that.
I'm sorry, you don't need the research, James. All you have to do is read the headlines. 99.9% of the people in the hospital right now in America are unvaccinated. Vaccinated people are just saying, hey.
Facts. Those are headlines.
No,
those are not facts.
Okay, James, I'm not going to go down this road with you. If you're not convincible, then I'm going to stop. Ed in Redondo Beach, California. Hey, Ed, what's on your mind?
Well, good morning, Tom. I've had the pleasure to speak with you a few times in the past, and this is the first time I think that I've actually disagreed with you. And it has to do with the COVID passports. And I'll stipulate up front, you know, this is real. The COVID disease is a real problem. A good friend of mine actually has it right now, and he's fortunately been vaccinated. So hopefully it'll be the milder situation as it works its way through. But with all that said, I can recall in years past you talking about the dangers of creating a papers, please society, like the ones, that we spot in the middle of the last century, Germany and so forth.
Ed, there's a difference between the police walking up to you randomly on the street and saying, we want to know who you are and why you're here. There's a huge difference between that and a restaurant owner saying, you can't walk in here with that cigarette. You can't walk in here without any pants on. You can't walk in here if you're carrying a virus.
Let me explain a little more what I'm getting at, because I don't disagree with everything you just said here. But here's the thing: when we create a digital passport, where you red card, green card everybody's smartphone, that's the modern version of the papers, please.
No, it's not. It's not at all the modern version of the papers, please. What it is proof that you've been vaccinated. It's the exact same thing your 10-year-old needs to get to enroll in a new school.
Hold on.
Well, quit going back to that analogy, because it's a BS analogy. I know it's the one that the Russian trolls are promoting all over the world, and it's got a whole bunch of people in France all hysterical, but it's a BS analogy. These are not the police. This is your local restaurant. This is, if somebody's going to visit me in my studio, they're going to have to prove to me they're vaccinated. I'm not going to let them in. It's a private business. No shoes, no shirt, no vaccine, no service. Sorry, buddy. That's got nothing to do with your papers, please.
Please, hear me out. Technologies combine. And for however noble the reason, when you create an infrastructure of exclusion where certain people are excluded,
this is not people being excluded. This is people being included. I am saying, and Ed, I'm sorry we're out of time. Everybody seems to have an excuse. Oh, we shouldn't have vaccine passports. Oh, we shouldn't get vaccinated. Come on, people. This is not rocket science. This is not complicated. I get it that you've got, the United Arab Emirates sponsoring trolls who are trying to scare the hell out of people in America. Don't be one of those people.
Listening to Thom Hartmann. Visit ThomHartmann.com for audio and video archives.
We'll be back with more of your calls right after this. Is 48 minutes past the hour. And welcome back. 48 minutes past the hour. Morris in Long Beach, California. Hey, Morris, what's up?
Hey, Professor, I heard a rumor. Check me out. Help me out with this one. I understand that 12 million people, 12 million you can count, 12 million people getting ready to get put out their properties, got their apartments or whatever, right?
Today.
Most of them going to be kids. Now, I heard that the CDC the Center for Disease Control, they got some influence. They could stop all this. Between the CDC and Mr. Biden, they could stop this. Now, they want to always point to the Republicans because they're in this bubble. They're inhumane. We got that. But this one's on us. This one's on the Democratic Party. They could have did something to stop this. Now, I'm not sure if my facts is true or not. That's why I'm checking with you. Is it true that the CDC and President Biden could have prevented 12 million people from being put out in the streets because they considered it this is one of them times we got an epidemic, a virus, we can't have 12 million people running around in the streets, right? They could have stepped up and did something about this. Am I tripping or am I right on the money?
Well, it's a little more complicated than that, but you're broadly right, Morris, and it's real unfortunate. What happened was we had the federal government saying that we were going to ban foreclosures, or kicking people out of their rented homes, foreclosures. We were going to ban that until a certain point, or Congress did, I'm not sure if there was a specific date or until the immediate emergency was over, June, and it got appealed to the Supreme Court. And it went before the Supreme Court, and the Supreme Court said, okay, this law has to end at a certain point, and so we're going to say it has to end at the end of July. And then Brett Kavanaugh, in a separate opinion, came out and said, and if you guys try to do this again without Congress, we're going to strike it down. And so it theoretically went to Congress. Now, there are folks who are arguing that the Centers for Disease Control has the power under a separate set of laws to say this is a national health emergency, and during national health emergencies we have extraordinary powers, and we're going to stop, evictions. The argument that was made at the Supreme Court was that this has nothing to do with medicine. Whether somebody is evicted from their home or not, yes, you can require people to wear masks. Yes, you could even force people to get vaccinated if you wanted to get really draconian. But what does that have to do with being kicked out of your house? And that was the argument that all the conservatives on the Supreme Court embraced. And so what that means is that in all probability, if the CDC were to say you can't kick people out of their house because it's a public health emergency, the Supreme Court would just strike it down. But they haven't said it, so we don't know. On the other hand, back on Thursday or Friday of last week, the Department of Housing and Urban Development, HUD, came out and said we are going to extend a moratorium on foreclosures and evictions, and it's just being ignored. I mean, it's again, people saying, the thing being that most of the states that could enforce that, or the various enforcement agencies, are saying, that goes in the opposite direction from the Supreme Court decision. So, the bottom line is Congress, a week or so ago, when they saw this train heading for this wall, should have passed something. It certainly would have been blocked by the Republicans in the Senate anyway, but they should have done something, Morris. And so, yeah, to a certain extent, this is on us. Make sense?
Thank you.
Okay.
Thank you. Yes, sir. I appreciate your honesty.
Thank you, Morris. Good talking to you. And it's good to, clarify those things and understand how they all work. We'll be back with more of your calls in just a minute. Stick around. Share the Thom Hartmann Program with your friends. We're available on SiriusXM, Free Speech TV, Pacifica, commercial stations nationwide, YouTube, Twitter, Facebook, on the Thom Hartmann app, and you can even tell your smart speaker to listen to the Thom Hartmann Program. So David Perry over at Medium.com put together a list of 38 reasons to investigate the Trump administration. Everything from the Russian influence over the 2016 election, to the Trump family's collusion with Russia, to Ivanka Trump's trademarks, to federal spending at Trump properties, to the civilians killed by Trump's drone strikes, to the Trump administration's role in turning the United States into the global epicenter for the COVID-19 pandemic. Yes, we are. Yes, it's grim. Their decision to sideline the CDC, politicizing mask wearing just to try to get himself reelected, the number of people who died because the White House kept PPE from blue states, from Democratic-led states, the contents of the Trump documents that Trump refused to release to the House Judiciary Committee and other committees, all the people who wouldn't speak, at all, ignoring subpoenas, violations of the Hatch Act, the deportation of COVID-positive immigrant families, illegal altering of records. Anyhow, there's a whole list. It's over at thomhartmann.com. Check it out. And welcome back. 54 minutes past the hour. Thom Hartmann here with you and Kylie in Marietta, California. Hey, Kylie, what's up?
Hi, Tom. Thank you for taking my call. I have a comment, and then I have a question. My comment is, to me, the vaccine is just like stopping for a red light because it keeps all of us safe. It's just following a rule to keep everybody safe.
Amen.
Yeah.
And masks, too.
Yes. I don't see a problem with that. But if the Delta strand, I know it's more contagious because obviously the percentage is going way up. But why isn't the news reporting on how many people have passed away from that? They used to do the death rate, and I used to think that just hearing the death rate was more frightening than all the arguments, because it was like, this is what's happening and this is the result. But they're not reporting on that now. They're just saying, oh, it's more contagious, but is it as...
There's two variables here to pay attention to, Kylie. The first is that we're really only about 2 weeks, not even quite that, into the widespread, explosive, spread of this contagious Delta variant. And so people are starting to show up in hospitals. Typically, the way it works is you get infected, you're sick for a week or two, and then it either goes away or it breaks into a really severe form, and you go to the hospital. You're in the hospital for a few days or a week, and then it either gets better or it gets worse, and you get intubated, and then you're intubated for a week or so, and then either you get better or you die. So the whole process can last about a month, and we're only 2 weeks into it. So we're not yet seeing the deaths, but they are coming. They are coming, a week, 2, 3 weeks down the road. We're going to start seeing those hospitals right now in Florida where they're starting to pack people into the hallways because they're running out of ICU beds. Pretty soon you're going to see the refrigerator trucks pulling up out back. That's going to be a few weeks down the road. So that's one variable. The other is that to determine whether it's the Delta variant or not is a completely different process than just testing for COVID. Testing for COVID looks for a particular protein that's on that spike, that's on that virus. It's common to all of the various COVID viruses. If you want to find out if this is the Delta variant that a person has, you have to basically look at the entire genome of the virus. And that's expensive, that's time consuming, and that's one of the reasons why we don't have good numbers yet on what percentage, and only a very small percentage of people who are tested are actually tested in a way that could reveal which variant they have. So we've got enough numbers to have public health information, but not the specifics. Did I answer your question, Kylie?
Yes, and one more question real quick.
I'm sorry, I don't have time.
You're listening to Thom Hartmann.
These companies support the Thom Hartmann Program. They are HelloFresh, the #1 meal kit delivery service. More information at HelloFresh.com, code TOM. CB Distillery for sleeping and pain relief. More info at cbdistillery.com, code TOM. Dinovite, only the best all-natural pet supplements. More info at dinovite.com. Annie's Kit Clubs, creativity delivered right to your door. More info at annieskitclubs.com/Tom. Wild Alaskan Company, delicious, sustainably sourced seafood delivered right to your door. More information at wildalaskancompany.com/Tom. And Mack Weldon, reinventing men's basics. More info at mackweldon.com/Tom.
For the Thom Hartmann University Book Club today, we're reading Locked Down, Locked Out, Why Prison Doesn't Work and How We Can Do Better by Maya Chenwar, who is, or was, I believe she still is, the publisher, or the editor, rather, over at truthout.org. This is from the introduction, the very beginning of the book. She uses a word I can't say on the air. I'll replace it with the word damn. Damn, 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 damn. I'm crying with my mother over the phone. It's late evening, December 25th, 2012, and Kayla, my only sister and best friend, has been arrested for the 7th time in the past 6 years. She's in jail again, and this time we're sort of hoping she'll stay there. If she asks, I tell Mom, I'm not bailing her out. Well, you know, we're not, Mom says, her voice low and far away, a weary echo of words uttered in months and years past. If she's in there, at least she'll be safe. Jail, we agree, may be the only place that can save Kayla's life, staving off her burning dependency on heroin. Neither of us acknowledges that regardless of whether Kayla stays clean while incarcerated, sooner or later she'll be getting out. Do we know what she's in for, I asked Mom. Does it matter? I think of Kayla cuffed and listless, being dragged through the doors of the Cook County Jail, catching the eyes of women she's known before in court, on the street, in juvenile detention, in jail, in prison. I wonder whether a part of her is relieved to be back. Later, when I pick up the phone and hear a robotic voice announce, you have a collect call from the Cook County Jail, press 5 to take the call, I press the hang-up button and get into bed. My attitude toward Kayla's incarceration was born out of desperation. She'd overdosed 3 times within 2 months, passing out on the street, awakening in abandoned buildings or crowded hospitals, her pulse barely ticking. Yet my wish chafed against not only my love for her, but also my politics, my ideals, my sense of justice and truth. After all, I run a social justice-based news organization and have denounced the colossus that is the prison industrial complex for as long as I can remember. For nearly a decade, I've corresponded with a number of people in prison as both interviewees and pen pals, and I've learned much from them about the violence and hopelessness of our system. My understandings of the power structures that create prisons have been guided by the work of people like activist and scholar Angela Davis, a staunch prison abolitionist. How could I reconcile my wholehearted opposition to the prison industrial complex with a desire to see my own sister locked up? When I look back on that time, I can only comprehend it by acknowledging the insidious, persistent role that prison occupied in my mind. It was closely connected to the role it occupies in larger society. Incarceration serves as the default answer to many of the worst social problems plaguing this country. Not because it solves them, but because it buries them. By isolating and disappearing millions of Americans, more than 2.3 million right now, making us the most incarcerated country on the planet, prison conveniently disappears deeply rooted issues that society, or rather those with power in society, would rather not attend to. Prison, writes Angela Davis, performs a feat of magic. As massive numbers of homeless, hungry, unemployed, drug-addicted, illiterate, and mentally ill people vanish behind its walls, the social problems of extreme poverty, homelessness, hunger, unemployment, drug addiction, illiteracy, and mental illness become more ignorable, too. But, as Davis notes, prisons do not disappear problems, they disappear human beings. And the caging and erasure of those human beings, mostly people of color and poor people, perpetuates a cycle in which large groups of people are cut off from mainstream society and denied the freedoms, opportunities, civil dignity, and basic needs that allow them a good life. In many jails and prisons, incarcerated people are tossed into a dank, dungeon-like solitary confinement cell when they are determined to have misbehaved. It's dubbed the hole. Isolated and dark, it shuts out almost all communication with fellow prisoners in the outside. Guards control the terms of confinement and the channels, if any, by which words can travel in and out. The hole presents a stark symbol of the institution of prison in its entirety, which functions on the tenets of disappearance, isolationism, and disposability. The solution to our social problems, the mechanism that's supposed to keep things together, amounts to destruction, the disposal of vast numbers of human beings, the breaking down of families, and the shattering of communities. Prison is tearing society apart. This country's most marginalized communities bear the overwhelming brunt of that devastation, but ultimately we are all caught up in the destruction as the politics of isolation ruptures the human bonds that could otherwise hold together a safer, healthier, and more just society. The behemoth that encompasses the prison is called by many names. The most meaningful ones, I think, are those that convey the pervasiveness of its power, the way it infects the world outside as well as the people within. Scholar and activist Beth Ritchie uses the term prison nation, describing it as, quote, a broad notion of using the arm of the law to control people, especially people who are disadvantaged and come from disadvantaged communities, end quote. That control can take the form of prisons, jails, surveillance, policing, detention, probation, harsh restrictions on child guardianship, the militarization of schools, and other strategies of isolation and disposal, particularly deployed against poor communities of color, especially black communities. Others have used prison nation simply to demonstrate the system's vastness, how it infiltrates our culture and fuels our national politics, often in invisible ways. Prison industrial complex, PIC, is another key term. Rachel Herzing of the prison abolitionist group Critical Resistance defines it, and then she goes on through this. It's an extraordinary book, Locked Down, Locked Out by Maya Shin.
Marx, Why Are There Still Creationists, is the title of the book.
This is the Thom Hartmann Program.
Welcome back. Thom Hartmann here with you. So the rant that I wrote and published this morning over at HartmannReport.com is, actually it's titled Trump's Shadow Cabinet is part of his ongoing coup. I'm guessing most of you didn't even know that Trump has a shadow cabinet. It's possible that he doesn't. Well, let's define terms first. A shadow cabinet. There are 3 countries in the English-speaking world. There's 4 major countries in the English-speaking world: the U.S., Canada, the UK, and Australia. And people sometimes add in New Zealand. And of those countries, the only one that doesn't have what's called a shadow government is the United States. And back on, literally on Election Day of last year, on November, 3rd, as I recall, I said on this program, we didn't know if Biden was going to win or not, and it certainly looked like he was. All the polling indicated he was, but that was the case 4 years earlier too. All the polling showed Hillary Clinton was going to win by more than 3 million votes, which she did. 77,000 votes in 4 swing states turned it for Donald Trump, and it looks like all of them came about as the result of a combination of voters being purged from the voting rolls in several of those states, and a massive influx of money from the United Arab Emirates and from Russia via trolls to convince, in particular, black people not to vote for Hillary Clinton because of her super predator comment. That was the principal thing that was going out. And then there was also the, both sides are the same, don't even bother showing up. That was going out. Those were the main memes. But in any case, when I was talking about that on the air, I said, if Biden loses this election and Trump gets a second term, then what Biden should do is set up a shadow government with a shadow cabinet, like they do in the UK and Australia and Canada. And that way, the shadow government, if Trump's government comes out and says, okay, our new immigration policy is that we're going to shoot people at the border, and the shadow cabinet then comes out and the shadow immigration czar says, no, if we were in power, our policy would be completely different. It's just a way of communicating what you would do, right? The shadow governments and the shadow cabinets, and that's what they're called. And I've got links to them, actually, in the article for the UK, Canada, and Australia in the piece I wrote over at HartmannReport.com today. Those shadow governments are not trying to disrupt their government. They're not trying to overthrow their government. They're not claiming that they are actually the government when they are not. They are simply saying, if you put us in power in the next election, this is how we would respond to this thing that is happening today. And I think that's a good idea, actually. I think both parties in the United States should do the same thing. But Trump was on a fringe right-wing, internet-based TV show over the weekend. Or not Trump, excuse me, it was Mark Meadows, his last chief of staff. And he said, this was Friday night, and he said, we met with several of our cabinet members tonight. We actually had a follow-up meeting with some of our cabinet members. He used the phrase cabinet or cabinet members, as I recall, 17 or 18 times in that interview. And then he referred to Trump the same way that Trump refers to himself and other people refer to him in the literally daily now fundraising emails I'm getting from Donald Trump. He has brought in $100 million in the first 6 months of the year from the poor shills that get these emails from him, and or the poor suckers that get these emails from him. And in them, he refers to himself as President Trump. And that's what Mark Meadows said, which was very strange. He said, Donald Trump is a president who is fully engaged, highly focused, and remaining on task. And what this tells me is that we have been looking at January 6th with the wrong lens. We've been thinking that January 6th was the moment of the attempted coup. And I'm saying, no. Donald Trump started the coup, the attempt to overthrow the United States government and end democracy in America. He started that, I could actually build an argument that he started it back during the primaries in 2015, but really in a big way the day after he lost the election on November 4th, when he started talking about there was fraud in Philadelphia, and there was fraud in Detroit, and there was fraud in Pittsburgh, and there was fraud in Milwaukee, and there was fraud in Atlanta, and there's fraud in Phoenix, all towns with large black populations. And by the way, it's only counties with large black populations that Republicans are talking about auditing. They're only doing Maricopa County in Arizona. They only want to do Pittsburgh in Pennsylvania. They're talking about doing Detroit in Michigan. I mean, this is really all about race. But my point is that the coup began the day after the election, the day after Trump lost the election, and is still rolling on. It is still happening. You know, Voltaire famously said that if you can make people believe absurdities, you can cause them to commit atrocities. Jim Jones basically said if you can convince people, I mean, it didn't say, but his actions, that if you can convince people enough, you can cause them to kill themselves. But Jones was a piker. He only killed 913 people. Donald Trump has killed, according to some pretty good medical analysis, at least 400,000 of the 610,000 Americans who have died already did not need to die and would not have died had the United States simply taken the same, masking and contact tracing choices back when Trump was president that South Korea did, that Taiwan did, that Japan did, that most of Europe did. We wouldn't have had those deaths. But now, I mean, to this day, to this moment, there are people showing up in hospitals, deathly sick, claiming that I can't have COVID. There's no such thing. It's a hoax. Donald Trump told me it's a hoax. I know I read it on Facebook. It's a hoax. As they're having, the anesthetic put in their vein to knock them unconscious so that they can shove a tube down their throat to breathe for them. I don't have COVID. It's not possible. I mean, Jim Jones was a piker. You got this Pastor Greg Locke in Tennessee. He's saying, this vaccine and then this disease, it's all a hoax. And don't, if you wear a mask in my church, I'll throw you out, and don't get vaccinated. This guy has blood on his hands because the coup is rolling on. Down in Florida, you've got Ron DeSantis, who's trying to live up to his name of Ron DeathSantis, which is, I mean, this is pretty amazing when you think about it. If it's true that a majority of the people who are dying of COVID are right-wing Republicans, I think it was less true a year ago than it is now. 39,000 people have died of COVID in Florida that we know of. DeSantis fired his state epidemiologist because she was claiming that he was radically undercounting the number of deaths. But 39,000 plus officially died of COVID in Florida. Ron DeSantis won the last election by 32,463 votes. Is he killing off his own voters? And by the way, that was after he had purged over 1 million voters, or not he, but the Republican Party had purged over 1 million voters from the Florida voting rolls in the 24 months before the election. But now DeSantis is issuing an executive order saying that you cannot mandate that kids in schools wear masks when kids can't get vaccinated. And the older kids, the kids over 12, you know, they have one of the lowest vaccination rates in the country, particularly in Florida, because their parents aren't vaccinated. And I'm telling you, when these kids go back to school, and in some, I believe in Georgia, they're starting back to school right now, this week. In Florida, it's going to be in about 2 weeks. When these kids go back to school, all hell is going to break loose. Because this virus is as contagious as chickenpox. And chickenpox just rips through communities. But apparently, no matter how many of the Trump followers they kill, you know, the coup just keeps rolling along. They are still trying to end democracy in America. The Washington Post had a headline, you know, a week or so ago. This was the base because of a CBS News poll, found half of all registered Republicans think a more effective strategy for their party than coming up with ideas that people want to vote for is changing voting laws so that Democrats can't vote. The headline in the Washington Post, almost half of Republicans admit they're ready to ditch democracy. That was just the headline. Trump, and by the way, this coup is very profitable. Trump has raised, as I said, over $100 million. DeSantis has raised $44 million. Marjorie Taylor Greene raised $3 million in the first 3 months of the year, and she wasn't doing anything. She'd lost all her committee assignments for lying to her voters. I mean, you've got a bunch of Trumpy Republicans who are just rolling in the dough. So what I'm saying is, and now we hear that, you know, the proof that it started the day after the election, Trump goes to his Department of Justice and says, just declare this election marred with fraud, and me and my Republican congressman will take care of it from there. We'll take it from there. Right. And then, you know, that didn't work. The DOJ didn't go along with it. So January 6th happened, where they tried to assassinate Mike Pence and Nancy Pelosi. And the only person, by the way, and I don't know why this doesn't get highlighted, and it is in the news coverage, but it's very rarely highlighted. The only person who had the authority to activate the D.C. National Guard was the president. They're under the direct control of the executive branch. Every other state, it's the governor, but there is no governor in D.C. It's the district. It's not the state of Columbia. They don't have statehood. And the mayor of the district has no power over the National Guard, although there's legislation right now to try to give it to her. But, you know, Trump would not, and Trump's guy, Chris Miller, would not activate the National Guard. And meanwhile, we've got, you know, all across the United States, local school boards being seized by anti-American Trumpies, you know, followers of this former reality TV star. And this is becoming a very alarming phenomenon. So I'm telling you, this coup was not January 6th. It started with the Trump presidency. It went on steroids the day after he lost the 2020 election. And it continues to this day with just as much momentum as it ever had. And it's spinning off hundreds of millions of dollars that the people who are promoting it are stuffing in their pockets. Let us not be fooled. We'll be back. Stick around.
This is the Thom Hartmann Program.
Vanilla ISIS? The nightmare fantasy shared by Vanilla ISIS revealed right after this. And welcome back. Robert in Portland. Hey, Robert, what's up?
Yeah, hey, Tom, I just wanted to, I kind of wanted to go back to what Dr. Eric Feigl-Ding was talking about. He was sourcing a lot of the studies from Israel regarding the efficiency about being less than 50% in the vaccine. Mm-hmm. And I thought that should be well noted because, as he said, there's not a lot of data here. And partly, I'm going to pull up a article here, but basically the CDC is sitting on this evidence right now. They're calling on the CDC to release this that Fauci was sourcing, but they haven't released as public yet. And it's very frustrating because, you know, people like Dr. Eric Feigl-Ding need to be viewing this. But I just find it very concerning because the FDA they announced that their CDC's PCR test failed review, and they did a class 1 revoke of that. That's going to be at the end of the year. But the reason they revoked it is because, the flu.
That was from a year and a half ago.
No, the FDA announced that the CDC's PCR test failed review, and that they're going to withdraw it by the end of 2021. I'm reading it right here. It's also
right, but nobody's using that test.
It's an Innova. It's the Innova SARS antigen rapid equality. I guess there might be more. How do we know? Because they're not releasing the data.
Yeah. Robert, the CDC has released an enormous amount of data. You can see it on their website. The study out of Israel probably needs to be peer reviewed. I'm not going to go down this, oh my God, we don't know enough rabbit hole with you, Robert. I'm just not going to go there. We know plenty. And we certainly know enough to know that we shouldn't be doing this. We shouldn't be exposing ourselves to this disease. We shouldn't be exposing others. We do need mask mandates, and we do need, in my opinion, a vaccine passport. John in Sebring, Florida. Hey, John, what's up?
Hey, this deal with the deer herd in Michigan.
Right.
Is this something that you think is going to make the deer meat not suitable to eat? And how is it not jumping to the cattle?
Well, it may well be, and that's the thing. I mean, it used to be with the earlier variants, and this is a huge line of demarcation, and we don't yet know what this means. But with the old virus, the only animals that would infect were animals that had receptors for a particular hormone called angiotensin. They were called angiotensin receptor sites. And mice, for example, don't have angiotensin receptor sites. They regulate their blood pressure in a different way. I don't know how many other mammals share those with us, the angiotensin receptor sites, or not. But that was the thing that was like a barrier to the virus from jumping species. And now with the Delta variant, it can infect an animal that doesn't use angiotensin as a way to regulate blood pressure. And which means that, and whether that means that the meat of the deer is bad or the deer itself is contagious, I don't know. Whether that means that, like he said, it has gotten into dogs and cats now. What that's going to do to cattle, what that's going to do to pig farms, what's that going to do to, when it hits the industrial agriculture operations here in the United States and overseas. I mean, this could be, to the extent that they're a large part of our food supply, this could be a real disaster if that variant makes them really sick. If, on the other hand, it just gives them the same kind of, head cold that it gives to people who are vaccinated, that's a whole other thing. But then, is there another variant coming behind that? This has the potential to get real bad, John, and we just don't know. Change starts with you. You can be calling your Democratic or Republican representatives to let them know what you think by calling 202-224-3121. It's the Capitol switchboard. It'll get you right through to them. We have a new video over at ThomHartmann.com for the folks who support our program, and it's this one's a geeky science one. And it's about this little snippet of genetic material, what's called microRNA. And the name of this one is called MIR1, M-I-R-1. And we've known for years that when muscles are used, I'm talking about exercise to the point where you feel fatigue in your muscles, that when when muscles are exercised, it depletes them of MIR1. What they didn't know is where that MIR1 goes and what it does. And it turns out that our fat cells draw the MIR1 in from the muscles, and it causes the fat cells to start converting themselves into fatty acids that can be used to feed the muscles. So we're not just building muscle, but we're also reducing fat in our body. It's absolutely fascinating. I'm going into depth on it in this new video. It's over at ThomHartmann.com. Welcome back. 24 minutes past the hour. Vanilla ISIS terrorism. Chauncey DeVega is writing about this over on Salon. And I think it got picked up by Raw's story as well. And he's talking about how we are not accurately describing Donald Trump and his allies, and drawing parallels between Trump and his followers and ISIS, only this is white supremacy instead of Muslim supremacy. And you know, he goes through this in some detail. And talks about this essay over at Vanity Fair on Christian nationalism, and how Jeff Sharlet points out the founding myth why Christian nationalism is un-American. He notes the Jericho marchers who blew shofars around the Capitol on January 5th in a reenactment of the Holy Conquest in the book of Joshua. You know, bottom line, there is a huge religious piece to this Trump movement. There's a huge religious piece. In fact, I think you can argue accurately that the QAnon cult is a religious cult, not just because they believe in something, but because it is the latest offspring of radicalized fundamentalist Christianity. They proclaim Jesus. They are outspoken fundamentalist Christians who also believe that Democrats are drinking the blood of children, that Satan has infected our body politic, that Donald Trump was sent by God to save America from democracy, that democracy is a terrible thing because it's mob rule, that the founders never intended to have democracy. I mean, all this weird and bizarre mythology that every now and then is grounded in a little kernel of truth that just makes it seem so credible, and it's absolutely not. And if this continues to go down this road, and I'm going to rant about this at greater length tomorrow, but if this continues to go down this road, we have the potential to spin off our own Al-Qaeda or ISIS movement here in the United States. If you think this is something that only happens in countries where, you know, only 1% of the population has a college education, like Afghanistan, or maybe 5% like Iraq, think again. This is part of the history of Western civilization. I mean, just look at the Crusades. Anyhow, we'll continue the conversation after the break. I'll pick up your phone calls in just a minute, right after this break here at the bottom of the hour. Stay with us. It's the Thom Hartmann Program, telling you the truths the multinationals would really rather you didn't know.
You're listening to the Thom Hartmann Program. Call 202-808-9925.
I'll be right back with your phone calls. We are just getting started here.
This is the Thom Hartmann Program.
Our book today in the Thom Hartmann, Unequal America by Carol Anderson. This is from the introduction. It was like a snuff film, that July 6th, 2016 live stream. Philando Castile sat in his car, buckled in, bleeding, dying. "Why did you shoot him, sir?" asked his fiancée, Diamond Reynolds, pain piercing her every word. Castile, who had been pulled over in a suburb of St. Paul, Minnesota, because his, quote, wide-set nose, end quote, supposedly resembled that of a robbery suspect, had been reaching for his ID, but in order to avoid any surprises, let the police officer know he had a gun with him, a legally permitted, right-to-carry concealed gun. That was all the cop needed to know. Officer Geronimo Yanez began shooting. Castile's death came just one day after Alton Sterling's down in Louisiana. He, too, was carrying a gun, which was not unusual in this right-to-carry state. Granted, Sterling had a felony conviction, so owning a firearm was, for him, illegal, but he had been robbed before and wanted protection. On July 5th, 2016, the Baton Rouge police received a 911 call that there was a man with a weapon threatening customers at a local convenience store. As officers rolled onto the scene, they saw Sterling sitting there, selling CDs and DVDs, just as the store owner allowed him to do and indeed welcomed. The threatening man was not Sterling. In fact, there was no threatening man. It had been a prank call, but that didn't matter. Within a few minutes, police had thrown the black man down, pinned him to the asphalt, and then started yelling that Sterling had a gun. He did. It was in his pocket where he could hardly reach it, what with the officers squatting on both his legs and one arm. Nevertheless, the police began firing round after round into his prone body, point blank. Blood poured out of his chest, but not for long. Alton Sterling was dead. The back-to-back deaths of these two black men police had shot for carrying guns should have jolted into action the Second Amendment's staunchest advocate, the National Rifle Association. In 1995, for example, the organization's denunciations flew fast and furious when it contended that law enforcement not only overreacted, but went out of its way to kill gun owners. Angered by the deaths at the Branch Davidian compound in Waco, Texas, and the siege and firefight at Ruby Ridge, Idaho, both of which were sparked by federal agents serving warrants for weapons violations, Wayne LaPierre, the NRA's executive vice president, angrily wrote, quote, "If you have a badge, you have the government's go-ahead to harass, intimidate, and even murder law-abiding citizens," end quote. He further denounced cops as, quote, "jackbooted government thugs who have more power to take away our constitutional rights, break in our doors, seize our guns, destroy our property, and even injure or kill us." Nearly 2 decades later, that sentiment had not changed. This was evident when Nevada rancher Cliven Bundy, who had refused to pay over $1 million in fees for grazing his cattle on public land, summoned his gun-toting, self-styled militiamen to do battle with federal authorities to prevent the seizure of his herd for restitution. Richard Mack, a former recipient of the NRA's Law Enforcement Officer of the Year award, asserted, "If federal agents are going to start killing people, I'm sorry, but to show the world how ruthless these people are, women and children need to be placed in the front lines as human shields." Mack didn't flinch as he insisted, quote, "Women need to be the first ones shot. I would have put my own wife or daughter there on the front lines, and I would have been a screaming bloody murder to watch them die," end quote. Larry Pratt, a speaker at the NRA's 2014 National Convention, commenting on the fact that Bundy, quote, "backed them," the Bureau of Land Management agents, down with automatic rifles and other deadly weaponry, proudly called that armed confrontation, quote, "a proper, legitimate, lawful response to illegitimate, unlawful exercise of government power, particularly on the federal level," end quote. Yet how quickly the NRA's swagger disappeared when government agents gunned down Philando Castile and Alton Sterling for merely carrying guns. Sterling's death didn't even merit acknowledgement. As for Castile, the NRA broke its silence only after inordinate pressure from African-American members led the gun manufacturers' lobby to issue a tepid statement that the Second Amendment was applicable, quote, "regardless of race, religion, or sexual orientation." When pressed further by many of its members to stand up for Castile, the often fierce organization demurred, saying it was, quote, "important for the NRA not to comment while the investigation is ongoing." This situational silence did not go unnoticed. The NRA had not only loudly defended the rights of those of the Branch Davidian cult and at Ruby Ridge, men who had actually shot and killed members of law enforcement, but the organization had also doubled down on calling for more guns in the face of mass shootings in a public school in Newtown, Connecticut, and a movie theater in Aurora, Colorado. Yet here, the guardian of the Second Amendment was now deliberately ignoring the inconvenient fact that black men had been killed for merely possessing a firearm. "Where's the NRA?" asked journalist Hannah Kozlowska. "Didn't Sterling and Philando Castile have Second Amendment rights too?" David Graham in The Atlantic coolly observed that, quote, "two shootings give a strong sense that the Second Amendment does not apply to black Americans the same way it does to white Americans," end quote. Washington Post columnist Eugene Robinson wrote that he saw the old Jim Crow whites only sign plastered above the Second Amendment. The book, The Second, by Carol Anderson. Missed my opening rant today? It's usually published over at HartmannReport.com, where you can read it and share it with your friends for free. Check it out, HartmannReport.com. Just a reminder that my daily rants are published every day over at HartmannReport.com, and our podcast, our 1-hour podcast of the show, which is entirely free, is available through iTunes and all the normal places where you find podcasts. Cut down of our show. And that we post a weekly video over at ThomHartmann.com And the one this week is about seditious conspiracy, U.S. Code 2384. And the argument I'm making is that this law, which imposes 20 years in prison to, by force, prevent, hinder, or delay the execution of any law of the United States, end quote, is something that we should be seriously considering dusting off and applying to not just the people who showed up on January 6th, but the people who sent them there. Check it out, ThomHartmann.com. And welcome back. Thom Hartmann here with you and picking up your phone calls. Sandra at Omaha, Nebraska. Hey, Sandra, what's on your mind today?
Hey, your show reminds me so much of the old Meeting of Minds by Steve Allen, where important topics were discussed. And I do see an intersection between the virus and climate change today. When everybody was sent home due to the virus and the skies cleared, and those of us who work from computers at home still got the job done. Mm-hmm. Businesses saw benefits lower electric bills. We employees saw benefits of not commuting on rotten roads. And the climate cleared to the point you could see images you couldn't see before. Yeah. So now businesses are saying, oh, everything's fine. Let's get back to the office. We know it isn't. And my question is, to these companies, why, when they can see that we made a difference, why is it they can't continue to save money and let us continue to work from home? And since there's a vaccine that's been already proven to make a dramatic difference in protection and reduce medical bills, why aren't insurance companies requiring their customers get vaccinated, or they will deny coverage if they get COVID and don't have a legitimate reason not to be vaccinated? Okay, in answer to your second question, I'm guessing, although I'm sufficiently certain of this, I would put money on it, but I can't point you to a source. I'm guessing that the reason that the insurance companies have not taken that step is because the vaccine has not been fully authorized by the FDA. Once that happens, Katie, bar the door. It's gonna change a lot of things. They deny coverage for so many other things. Mm-hmm. I'm surprised they haven't already on this. Yeah. Well, I believe it's because of that FDA certification, and I know that there's the Republicans and the right-wingers and even the anti-vaxxers are out there going, oh, it's not certified by the FDA. Well, it's going to get certified by the FDA probably in the next couple of weeks, and when that happens, it's going to change a lot of dynamics in this country. Yeah. And we need to be working from home if we can. Well, and that's a whole second issue, and that's that whole landscape is changing. I mean, I'm hearing from people that the office buildings that their office is in. I was talking with a friend of mine the other day who's an insurance agent, and he's like, I'm going into my office now one day a week for a half a day for an afternoon, whereas I used to be in there 5 days a week all day. And it's not COVID even anymore. It's just, hey, I got used to working from home and I can do a good job of it. He has a high degree of autonomy. Insisting on everybody comes back. Everybody's got to come back. It's all gone. It's all taken care of. I think it's changing, Sandra, and it's particularly changing. I mean, if you remember Stephen Allen, my memories of Steve Allen are black and white, right? That was a long time ago. This show, Meeting of Minds, was in color. The costumes were wonderful. The actors were fantastic, and the arguments were epic. Huh. Well, that must have been the early 60s? No, it was in the late 70s, 77 through 81. Oh, really? You can look it up online. You can watch some of the old programs. If you look it up, you can find the right links. I'll check that out. But my where I was going with that is that we are of an older generation, you and I, and although I'm probably quite a bit older than you. Yeah, tragedy too. But the millennials, the kids, the people under 30 right now, they are saying we don't want to go back to the office. And in fact, you've got a bunch of. I mean, I've seen this headline. It was in the Wall Street Journal. It was all over the business media. It was in the Financial Times 2 weeks ago. That there are multiple companies now where they're saying come back to work, and their employees, particularly their younger employees, are saying, in those jobs where they can demonstrate that they can do it just as well from home, and they don't need a team essentially working together in real time, those employees are saying no. Now, the question is, what percentage of jobs does that represent? Is that 10% of jobs in America, or is that 80% of jobs in America? And I don't think anybody knows.
But
I don't know, but we can sure see if the skies get smoggy again by letting us stay home.
There you go. And this is something that, this is another way that this is going to have changed, the dynamics of America in a big way. Sandra, thank you for the call. It's so nice to hear from you. I appreciate it. Andy in Hoosick Falls, New York. Hey, Andy, what's up?
Hi, Tom. I just wanted to kind of tell you I changed my tactics in some respects on how I've been having my conversations with some of the Republican anti-vaxxers that I've been encountering. And when they kind of start to tell me about their rights and their freedoms, I say, you know what? You're welcome. I just say, that's it. You're welcome. And when they ask me why, I say, there doesn't seem to be any argument over the fact that there's millions of Americans who've recovered from COVID who are now experiencing long-term lingering effects from this.
Yeah, it seems like it's about 10% of cases, in fact. It's huge.
Right. So it's quite conceivable by the time it blows over, we could be looking at millions of people who, without Obamacare, would be suffering from pre-existing conditions. So I say you're welcome.
Yeah.
Because the truth of the matter is that if this was on the news over and over and over again, people being denied coverage because of long-term COVID, right? Maybe they wouldn't be so inclined about speaking about their rights and their freedoms. They'd be fearful, and they might actually be inclined to take the shot. So I'm like, your freedom is a direct result of Obamacare.
Yeah.
So you're welcome.
Yeah. And we're those of us who are vaccinated are wearing masks, not because we're concerned that the mask is going to protect us from you, but because we're concerned that if we have an infection and don't know it, we're protecting you from us. And, you're welcome for that, too.
Right. So when they start screaming at me, I just tell them you're welcome. And it may not be a solution, but I certainly kind of enjoy, like I say, I'm owning the Republicans.
Yeah, okay. Sounds like a plan. Thank you very much for the call, Andy. It's good talking to you. Brian in Minneapolis. Hey, Brian, what's up?
Regarding the looking out for our fellow man and whether we should consider looking out for the unvaccinated and helping the poor and all that, I was taught a long time ago the goal in life is not how high up the ladder we get. The goal in life is how many do we bring with us.
Wow. Now, that's a true Christian, Muslim, Jewish, the world's religion sentiment, as opposed to the he who dies with the most toys wins. I like it.
Right. Okay. Thank you. Keep up the good work.
Okay. Thank you, Brian. That was a good one. Ann in Mamaroneck, New York. Hey, Ann, what's on your mind today?
Hi, Tom. I've been listening as often as I can and trying to follow everything with the variants, but I haven't heard, how this is being transmitted, if it's the same way,
Yeah, it's airborne.
When we first heard about this. But is it the other droplets hanging in the air the way it was? Remember all those videos we would see of, how long the droplets hang?
Well, that's how viruses get out of your body. When you talk in particular, or shout or sing, you're blowing water vapor out, and even water vapor particle, or even particles of, well, I guess water vapor is actually a gas, but and aerosolized individual still liquid droplets that are so small that you can't see them. And those are the things that carry the virus. And that's why a person who's infected wearing a mask, that mask will catch, 80, 90% of that stuff. A very, very large, even a cloth mask will catch a very large percentage of that. And thus you are protecting other people.
And, well, I'm just wondering, can you still get it through the eyes if you're walking? I mean, I'm vaccinated. My whole family's fully vaccinated except for one person. And by the way, my husband, who was double vaccinated, did get COVID because he's on immunosuppressants.
Ouch.
And thankfully he had good health care. But,
Did he have a mild case?
Horrible. He was immediately sent for the monoclonal antibodies, which knocked him out for 4 days. But, we hope he doesn't have any long-term effects.
Yeah.
So it's hard. There's a lot of people like him that are, vulnerable to this. And I just wonder, I go into stores now with a mask on. I had to fly recently. I was double masked the whole time, still using Purell. But I was upset for the children that were near me, taking off their masks, and the father would speak loudly across the aisle to them. I kept thinking, they're so vulnerable. These poor children on a flight. How, I was very upset that the parents didn't make them keep the masks on. So.
Yeah, we had this 5-year-old kid just a week or so ago that died in his mother's arms, and he was a perfectly healthy 5-year-old.
Oh my God.
Yeah, it's a tough one. With regard to whether you can catch the virus through your eyes, I don't know, but I would guess that if the virus cloud, from another person speaking to you, is in front of your face, you're going to inhale it. What we do know, and again, I'm not a physician and no expert on this. I just read the newspapers and the medical journals that fly my way. But what we apparently do know is that that the tissue of the upper respiratory system, your nose, the back of your throat, are the tissues that are super vulnerable to this virus right now, and the Delta variant, and that the Delta variant for a vaccinated person doesn't take out your lungs, but it will take out your ability to smell, and it will cause yes, and at least over the short term, and it will cause what seems to be a very bad head cold and a sore throat. Those are the symptoms now of Delta infection post-vaccination. So, and it passes after a couple of days, and then but you're contagious for as much as 10 days, and so you have to be careful about passing it, particularly along to people who are not vaccinated. And I got to run, I'm sorry, but thank you for the call. It's a great question. 46 minutes past the hour.
You're listening to Thom Hartmann. Visit ThomHartmann.com for audio and video archives.
Back with more of your calls and the news of the day in just a moment. Stick around. And welcome back. Juanita in Prosser, Washington. Hey, Juanita, thank you for watching us on Free Speech TV.
Okay, I want to say I was a polio victim.
Oh my.
I contracted polio in the 1940s. No vaccine.
All right.
I was lucky. I did not get a heavy case of it. But most of the callers apparently don't remember that time. Parents went nuts. They were scared to death the kids were going to get crippled, things of this nature.
Mm-hmm.
Schools were closed. Beaches were closed. Parks were closed. Movies, fairs, carnivals. But we made it. And when the vaccine came on in 1955, the polio dropped. And I just recently read that they think polio has been eradicated from Africa. There are only 2 countries that do not vaccinate. That's Afghanistan and Pakistan. And they have a serious problem with polio in their children.
Wow.
It's proof that vaccines do work. We don't see smallpox. We don't see people dying from tetanus anymore. Whoever heard of diphtheria?
Yeah.
All gone because of the vaccine. And I cannot believe that anybody, looking back in history, do not realize that vaccine has saved millions of people. And, we don't see crippled children anymore. Leg braces, iron lungs. But I am in my late 70s. I remember, and I vaguely remember my parents holding my hands trying to get me to walk. Now, I don't know why, but I was having a problem walking.
Mm-hmm.
I don't have that problem now.
Yeah.
But had I had the vaccine available, I probably would not, have caught polio. I do have one leg that's shorter than the other, and some other problems related to skeletal problems related because I had polio.
Yeah.
I don't understand. I just don't understand.
This is, we had I believe it was a caller last week who mentioned that if you go into cemeteries, you'll see all these children who died prior to the 1950s. And of course, it doesn't say the reason why they died on their headstone, or typically it doesn't. But there were all these diseases that killed children before we started aggressively vaccinating people in the 50s and 60s. And you don't see dead children any longer. And Franklin Roosevelt had polio. You know, he couldn't walk. They concealed it from the American people pretty effectively. But you know, he had a terrible case of polio. My wife's grandmother, who just died about a decade ago at the age of 92, as I recall, maybe it was 95. She had polio, and her right arm never worked. It was probably a third shorter than it should have been, and all withered up. And she, you know, she drove and did everything with her left arm. And you're right, Juanita. We have lost our memory of that time, and you know, be interesting if some of the movie makers started you know, doing shows that take place in the 40s and showing those things as a backdrop, because usually you don't hear about that. You don't read about it. Juanita, thank you. Your message is a public service to all of us. I appreciate the call. It's great to hear from you, and thank you again for watching Free Speech TV. We'll be right back. Our 1-hour free podcast recaps our show, and it's available wherever fine podcasts are found. And we have the full 3-hour podcast available over at thomhartmann.com if you want to really support our program. In addition to the free newsletter that we have over at thomhartmann.com, which gives you literally a link to every story or article I've talked about throughout the day, every day, comes into your email box every day. There's no charge. In addition to that, and my daily rants, which are free of advertising and free of charge over at hartmannreport.com, we also produce a weekly video. This week's video is about how power companies around the country, for-profit power companies 100% of the time, these power companies around the country are making it harder and harder and more expensive for people to install solar in their homes. All kinds of ways of trying to block people from doing this. And increasingly, they're getting support from Republican politicians, both at the local and the state level. It's something that we really need to know about, we need to be paying attention to, and we need to be aggressively pushing back on. You can check it out over at thomhartmann.com and at hartmannreport.com. And welcome back. 52 minutes past the hour. Thom Hartmann here with you and Miguel in Los Angeles. Hey, Miguel, what's on your mind today?
Hi, I'm calling about something that's I think is really important that people haven't really talked about, and that is why there are so many cults about Trump. And I think that the answer is that he was on The Apprentice for 15 years. I don't know if it's still on or not, but it was over 15 years. And many of the people think that he was, you know, they know him, and they think that was Trump. So they think that all the characteristics that they had for that TV Trump is actually Trump.
Right.
And so I think if the media would contrast the competent TV Trump with the incompetent Trump, it might be very helpful for. I think it would change a lot of people's minds. That's
an excellent point, and I think you're absolutely right. I think that a lot of people, their only knowledge of, you know, New Yorkers knew Trump, but that was pretty much it. I mean, you know, he was, and New Yorkers had a very terrible opinion of him. But he was on this TV show all these years, and people think it's reality TV, but that's just a brand name. It's actually scripted. It is heavily produced. They do multiple takes on individual scenes. The whole boardroom thing was a set in a TV studio. I mean, it's just you know, when people audition to be contestants, they're actors' auditions. You know, you have to be a good actor. It's just that simple. Occasionally, you get a celebrity who actually is a good actor, and they could therefore qualify for it. But it was all a performance. I'm with you. I'm absolutely with you. Miguel, thank you. Thank you for the call. Spot on. George in Lakewood, Colorado. Hey, George, what's on your mind today?
Oh, I just wanted to tell you why all must get vaccinated. And that's because of what we set out to do in accordance with Dr. Fauci. We say it was to save lives and eradicate as many save as many lives as we could and eradicate the virus by achieving over 70% vaccinated.
Right.
Well, all the naysayers are preventing that.
Well, and it's gotten even worse now with the Delta variant, because the Delta variant is so much more contagious. It's probably going to require over a 90% vaccination rate to achieve what the vaccine people call herd immunity. And, you know, and this Delta variant will reinfect you if you have already had COVID. There are a lot of people who had COVID back a year ago and think, oh, you know, I'm good, I already had COVID. No, you'll get it all over again, and it can take you down and kill you just as easily as it could the first time around. So excellent point, George. Thank you very much for the call. Diane in Sanford, Maine. Hey, Diane, what's on your mind today?
Well, hi, brilliant Tom. I may have missed this if you had covered it in the past, but this does have to do with vaccine mandates. And I know that I'm your age, and I think this is to speak to my generation would understand, I think, but the younger generations, I don't think that they understand that the reason they don't have polio, diphtheria, smallpox, any of these, is because these vaccines were mandated. Mm-hmm. You could not send your kids to school without these vaccinations.
Yep.
Or they couldn't go to school.
Yep.
So how that has changed, and I would say that COVID is now among these deadly diseases.
Oh, absolutely.
I do not understand why it's not mandated, why there is even a question about it.
I think the main reason, Diana, is that it has not yet obtained that full certification from the FDA, which, by the way, typically takes a decade. You know, this is less than a year, but it hasn't gotten that full certification. So the legal, you know, I believe it's legally difficult to mandate anything that hasn't been fully signed off on. But that's probably going to come in the next few weeks, from everything I'm hearing in the media.
Well, I certainly hope so. But another thought is that as far as, like, you know how especially the right wing and the anti-government assistance people,
Mm-hmm.
they're always saying, we hate government-free stuff. We hate that free stuff, you know?
Right.
Well, you know what? Right now, this vaccination is free.
Yeah.
And it's government paid for. If they put a limit on that, like 2 months, it's like, okay, you got up to 2 months and it's free. After that, you people, it's out of your own pocket.
Right, and it'll be the vaccine itself will probably be $100, $150, and then you've got to pay the doctor to administer the shot. So get ready. Yeah, spot on, Diana.
And even with the hospital, it's like, okay, you get in here now.
Oh, they'll charge even more.
You're listening to Thom Hartmann.
These companies support the Thom Hartmann Program. They are HelloFresh, the #1 meal kit delivery service. More information at HelloFresh.com, code TOM. CB Distillery for sleeping and pain relief. More info at cbdistillery.com, code TOM. Dinovite, only the best all-natural pet supplements. More info at dinovite.com. Annie's Kit Clubs, creativity delivered right to your door. More info at annieskitclubs.com/Tom. Wild Alaskan Company, delicious, sustainably sourced seafood delivered right to your door. More information at wildalaskancompany.com/Tom. And Mack Weldon, reinventing men's basics. More info at mackweldon.com/Tom.
We say fight back!
Today we're reading from Behold America by Sarah Churchwell, The Entangled History of America First and the American Dream. This is from the prologue. On Monday, 30 May 1927, a cool day with showers forecast, New Yorkers were gathering for the annual Memorial Day parades around the city. It was only 9 years since the end of the European War, into which America had been so reluctantly drawn and Europe had suddenly become closer than ever before. Precisely 10 days earlier, Charles Lindbergh had completed the first solo flight across the Atlantic in the spirit of St. Louis, and no one had yet stopped celebrating. Front pages around the country reported that Lucky Lindy had been mobbed in London, greeted by rapturous crowds of 150,000. Few Americans were talking about much else than the newest national hero, but in New York that day, different kinds of mobs were about to gather. Around 8 a.m., a group of Italian immigrants living in the Bronx set out for the elevated train on their way to Manhattan to join the parade. But they were not going to honor the American soldiers who had died in the service of their country. They were supporters of Mussolini, planning to join 400 American fascists who were marching in Manhattan's Memorial Day parade as part of the official fascist movement in the United States. They had been invited by the parade's organizers, to the outrage of many anti-fascists, including Italian nationalists and anarchists who threatened violence if the invitation wasn't rescinded. It wasn't. Like all his fellow fascists intending to march that day, Joseph Carisi was wearing the black shirt uniform, sporting leather boots, jodhpurs, a black cap, and carrying a steel-tipped riding crop. When he stopped to buy a newspaper, Carisi was jumped by two men, stabbed in the neck, and left to die on the sidewalk. Another fascist, Nicholas Amoroso, who was running either to catch up with his group or away from the killers, reports vary, was shot 4 times, once right through the heart. One of the two murdered men had served in the American Army during the Great War, the other with the Italian Army, papers reported. The parade they had meant to join took place without them, a fascist delegation of several hundred that was guarded by police to, quote, avert disorder. After the parade, the American blackshirts returned to their headquarters in the heart of Times Square. There, another of the fascists standing outside was set upon by 3 men. He defended himself with his riding crop as his fellow blackshirts charged out brandishing clubs and whips, chasing the assailant through the theater traffic in Times Square, who fled as the black-shirted mob tore through the traffic. 100 fascists, reported the New York Times, rushed the attackers. A melee ensued that was quickly dispersed by the police. There was also violence in Brooklyn, where a parade of fascisti marched from the Angelo Rizza Fascista League at 274 Troutman Street in Bushwick. The LA Times reported several hundred men were parading, including 40 or 50 in the black shirt uniform. Fights broke out between supporters and protesters mingling on the sidewalks, and an anti-fascist was found lying on the ground, stabbed in the back. He survived and identified a fascist as his assailant. Accompanied by 30 police reserves to forestall violence, the marchers made their way through Brooklyn, stopping at the Wilson Avenue station, where the fascisti came to attention and gave the fascist salute. They ended at a Roman Catholic church, where the priest blessed them under large American and Italian flags, while the police remained on guard. The biggest outbreak of violence that Memorial Day, however, occurred in Queens, where it centered around a different right-wing group, not Italian Americans, but the self-proclaimed 100% American kind. By 1927, the Ku Klux Klan had spread across the United States since its rebirth in Georgia 12 years earlier. The first Klan was formed in the immediate aftermath of the Civil War, as former Confederate soldiers in Tennessee created a secret society to promote white supremacism, and terrorize the newly freed slaves in the South during the Reconstruction era. The name is generally believed to have originated from the Greek word for circle, kuklos, while Klan pays homage to the mystified Celtic heritage supposedly shared by white Southerners. Within a decade or two, the first Klan had been successfully suppressed by law enforcement and died out by the turn of the century. But in 1915, it was resuscitated in Georgia, and by the early 1920s, the second Klan had achieved a powerful political presence in the United States, not only in the South, but across the country. I would add this is because of 1915, the movie Birth of a Nation came out. The Klan had an active presence in New York City and Long Island by 1927, with favorite slogans, which they even attempted to copyright at various points. That year, the Klan was calling attention to the fact that it first announced the program of 100% Americanism and of America First.
They were not, in fact, the first to adopt these mottos, as this book will show. In 1927, both phrases had been around for a decade or more. But as far as the Klan busily copywriting hate was concerned, America First belonged to them. And on Memorial Day in Queens, 1,000 or so of them had gathered to march, many in white robes and hoods. They were accompanied by 400 women from the so-called Clavana, the feminine branch of the Klan. Some of the reported 20,000 spectators in Queens that day objected to the Klan's presence, as others defended their right to march. Scuffles broke out, and it turned into a riot. Women fought women, and spectators fought the policemen and the Klansmen as their desire dictated, said a newspaper. Klan banners were shredded, and 5 of their number were arrested, said initial reports, while a few others were caught up in the confusion as well. The book, Behold America, Sarah Churchwell.
This is the Thom Hartmann Program.
And welcome back. So what happens when you ban critical race theory? This is fascinating. This is absolutely fascinating. The Republican Party had been casting about for much of this year. I mean, we're what, 8 months into the year now, and trying to find some little hook that they could put into the body politic of Americans and drag them along with the Republicans. And you know, they tried multiple things. None of them seemed to stick. You know, Biden is with the what was it called? The American Rescue Plan, the piece of legislation back in June that, you know, that cut child poverty in America by half. And the Republicans tried their, oh my God, what's it going to do to the deficit or the debt? And Americans were like, seriously? You know, Donald Trump, when he came into office, the national debt was $20 trillion. When he left, it was $27 trillion. And you're going to tell us that all of a sudden you guys are worried about the national debt? They're trying it again, by the way. This is, you know, Susan Collins this weekend on TV. Infrastructure debt. Oh, my God. Oh, yeah, right. Americans aren't buying it anymore. We have figured out that Ronald Reagan, from Ronald Reagan to Donald Trump, the Republican Party have been running a con job on us, a scam. So, you know, they went after the whole abortion thing, and they went after, oh, it's, you know, the Democrats are the parties of legalizing marijuana, and people were like, okay, that's cool with us. And then they tried going after trans people and, you know, and whipping up a hysteria about trans folks in sports and all this stuff. And, you know, none of it stuck. They weren't able to demonize the usual suspects. And I don't know if it's just that, you know, after 40 years, Americans have figured out that we've been conned, or if we kind of had a come to Jesus moment with the coronavirus and seeing people around us getting sick and dying and being confronted with our own mortality. Suddenly, a lot of this small stuff like, you know, gee, is my neighbor gay, became something that even the bigots decided bigotry was too much trouble. But whatever it was, they weren't able to get, you know, that hook into us until they discovered critical race theory. And of course, the reason they were so successful with this is because nobody knows what the hell critical race theory is. Because it's this weird little academic subset of legal studies, actually. It's a subset. It's not a subset of African American studies. It's a subset of law. And, you know, about how, you know, for example, when my dad came back from World War II in 1940, whatever it was, 1948, 49, when he came back from 2 years occupying Japan after World War II, he bought a house and he got a college education, and both were subsidized. He went to college for free. In fact, they gave him a stipend to go to college. And, you know, he got a house with the GI Bill. But the black guys that he was serving with in Japan couldn't. Why is that? Well, it turns out the law was being used to make that happen. Redlining was enforced by law. The inability of black people to vote was enforced by law. This was Supreme Court doctrine, Plessy versus Ferguson, 1898. And of course, that didn't get overthrown until 1965. My dad got out of the military in 1948, as I recall. So, critical race theory, as I said, is this, this legal thing, or, why is it that highways, when Eisenhower was building freeways, they always seem to go through black neighborhoods or separate black neighborhoods from white neighborhoods? How'd that happen? How is it that the power plants that are spewing all the poison, especially the coal-fired ones where they got these giant piles of coal ash that is toxic and radioactive and filled with heavy metals and poison, how come they're always upwind from the black community? Well, it turns out there's a reason for all those. It's not random, it's not accidental, and it's done with the force of law. So that's critical race theory. Well, nobody's teaching that stuff to 10-year-olds in 3rd or 4th grade. But nobody knows that, right? Nobody knows what critical race theory is. And so the Republicans were able to reinvent critical race theory and say, let me tell you what critical race theory is. Critical race theory is when you tell white children that they should feel bad because their ancestors had slaves who were black. And therefore, the little white children are guilty and should just sit around and cry all day long. I mean, this is the Republican sales pitch. I mean, it's a lie about what critical race theory is. And it's an attempt to distort America's history. But in any case, we've got state after state. I think we've got 17 states now where they've passed laws banning critical race theory being taught, either at the state level or at various county levels. You've got this explosion of the takeover of school boards. Here in Oregon, there was, this is, OregonLive.com is how you find the Oregonian, our local newspaper here. And this article by Eder Campuzano, titled, Oregon School Board Politics Have Never Been So Polarized, Partisan, and Hostile to Racial Equity. And they're talking about the town of Albany, Oregon. It's a little town, right? In the last 10, 15 years, every school board election, there's been basically one person running, the incumbent. It's 9 times out of 10, these are not even contested elections, right? When you vote for the school board member, you have one choice, and that's the person who's already on the school board. Because nobody wants to volunteer, it's not paid, or if it is paid, it's so little, it's not worth the effort. You got to take time away from a real job, in quotes. I mean, maybe being on the state school board in Texas pays money, but not in a little town, small town Oregon, or Washington State, or Idaho, or even small town New York, or Maryland, or Georgia. But suddenly there is this explosion of people running for school boards all across the country. And they're QAnon followers and Republicans, and they're all babbling about critical race theory. Oh my God, this is a threat to our children. It's going to make them feel terrible, our poor little white kids. You know, their basic premise is little black kids are perfectly old enough and tough enough to deal with being the victims of racism. But little white kids, they're too fragile and too young to even learn about it. So this is going on. You know, they're talking about from 2009 to 2015, out of 10 school board races across Oregon, only 2 of those 10 races had more than one candidate. In other words, it was always the incumbent running. But this is just exploding across the country. And now in Michigan, this ban on teaching critical race theory, it actually, the law, it hasn't passed yet in Michigan, but it's a proposed law, and it says that teachers can be subject to, they can be sued by parents, they can lose their jobs. They have not put criminal penalties in here yet, but the civil penalties are substantial if they teach, quote, anti-American and racist theories. Now, who determines what's anti-American or racist? And what they're explicitly saying, it also prohibits teaching that the United States is a fundamentally racist country. And so you've got these teachers. In fact, this is the guy who wrote the bill. His name is Barrett. He's a state legislator. He said, critical race theory degrades pride in America and degrades our freedoms and liberties. We can't teach these kids this stuff. And so what's happening now is teachers are, they're worried. I mean, this piece from the Detroit News, U.S. history teacher Matt Enochs and his 8th grade class watched together online as the mob broke into the Capitol building. And he was talking about how, the kids are asking questions. What's going on with this? Why are people doing this? And kids ask questions like, why is it that the power plants are always upwind of the black community? Why is it that so many black people in America are living in poverty? Why is it that Native Americans are still on reservation? Why is it that, and the teachers are now getting to the point where they're afraid to answer these questions. Because if they do answer these questions truthfully, they can not just lose their jobs, but in some cases they can be they can be sued by parents for tens or hundreds of thousands of dollars for polluting the brains of their little white children. This is serious and dangerous stuff. If we are going to be, Elie Mystal, by the way, for The Nation, he wrote this brilliant piece, Republicans hate voting rights because they threaten white power. And he quotes Senator Mike Lee, the Republican from Utah, who repeatedly says, we're not a democracy. This is the whole Republican thing. We're not, because democracy sounds like democratic, right? We're not a democracy, we're a republic. And he goes on to say, democracy isn't the objective. Liberty, peace, and prosperity are the objective of American government. And we can get there without democracy. Oh. Well, this, as Elie Mystal says, this is, if you want to end white male hegemony in the new world, then you have universal suffrage. Let everyone vote. And equal representation. He says these are the surest ways to end white male political supremacy, which is exactly what they're trying to avoid. He also points out that this didn't start with Donald Trump. That this whole movement to reinvent America's racial history, to get control of what we teach in our schools, and to suppress the vote in black neighborhoods, this whole movement began in 2008 when Barack Obama became president. This is all a reaction to our having had a black president. And now we've got a black vice president, and they're going after her. Same thing. And it's all about maintaining and strengthening, actually, white supremacy in the United States. And we just need to be clear about that. We need to be upfront about that. And when we hear about these laws trying to ban critical race theory from the Republican Party because they think they're going to win the 2022 and 2024 elections based on this, that it is all about promoting white supremacy. And frankly, who are the most outspoken advocates for white supremacy in the United States? The people that the FBI is now calling terrorists. They are proposing laws to support terrorists. Let that sink in.
This is the Thom Hartmann Program.
Pick up your calls in just a minute. I've got a quick geeky science that I think you'll find fascinating, and we'll continue our conversations right after that. And welcome back. Gary in Naples, Florida, watching us on Free Speech TV. Greed has no heart, Gary.
Greed has no heart, Thom Hartmann. Thank you.
How you doing?
I'm glad to be a member of the planet. I appreciate you asking. I can't believe I'll be 76, Tom. I mean, the last 20 years, right?
Yeah, they fly by. The older you get, the faster time goes, because every day is a smaller piece of your entire life.
That's exactly right. Just quickly, and I want to end with a thought for the program and you in America, if I may. It's not my quote, but I just want to say this, and is what you've been touching on for the last hour or so, I believe. This ongoing polluting of people's minds, not all, but a lot of people's minds with this Trump cult following. I've been saying along with you, it's a religious thing.
Mm-hmm.
It's almost a sickness. Now, I'm not a doctor, but I wonder if it is a sickness or it can develop into one. Because, and the facts bear it out, the unvaccinated, 37% of the unvaccinated are Republicans. That's a fact. 37% of Americans that are unvaccinated are belong to the Republican Party or whatever.
Do you know what percentage of the vaccinated are Republicans? I mean, the Republican Party is what, 25, 26% of America right now?
No, I don't.
Yeah. It would be interesting to compare the two.
Yeah, right. And now I know you're an optimist, and I applaud you for that. I'm not as much an optimist as you are.
Here's the pessimist's perspective on that, Gary. There's no alternative to optimism. No viable alternative.
Okay. All right. Well, I learned something today. I know. I'm glad. I think I'm very reality-based, but I just learned something. So I'll work on that.
Okay.
So my thought for you, the show in America, it's not my words, but I believe in it. Be kind for everyone you meet, or even talk to on the radio or talk to on the television is fighting a hard battle.
Yeah, you're right. It's a tough time for everybody in this country, and sometimes the people who piss us off the most, you know, the ones who cut us off in traffic, or the ones that act like jerks in the store or whatever, they're the ones that are going through some of the hardest times, you know, and they're just not dealing with it well. And I think that we have to have compassion, at least until they stick a gun in our face. I mean, there's a certain point where the compassion ends.
All right.
Yeah.
Keep up your good, solid, honest work.
Okay, Gary, I'll do my very best. Thank you very much for the call. I think that, you know, this whole thing about optimism and pessimism, I really meant that when I said that, you know, the pessimists trying to figure out, you know, what's the worst that could happen. Well, the worst that could happen is an optimist looking at what's the best that can happen. The worst that can happen is that you start obsessing on the worst that can happen and you just kind of go into a psychological death spiral. And what's the alternative to that? Optimism, where you look at what's the best. You acknowledge the worst that could happen. I mean, I acknowledge, you know, that there's a whole bunch of awful stuff going on. But you know, without hope for the future, it's like, why bother? And I had to cultivate optimism. I walk around, when I walk home, I go out of my way every single day to look around at the world and just realize what a friggin' miracle it is that I'm alive on this planet at this moment. And just thank you. Thank you. We'll be back, right back. Share the Thom Hartmann Program with your friends. We're available on SiriusXM, Free Speech TV, Pacifica, commercial stations nationwide, YouTube, Twitter, Facebook, on the Thom Hartmann app, and you can even tell your smart speaker to listen to the Thom Hartmann Program. Hey, we have a couple of special things over at ThomHartmann.com and HartmannReport.com. Of course, at HartmannReport.com, every single day, well, 6 days a week, Sunday accepted, I write a rant about an issue of the day that I think is important. Louise and I work on these together. We get them out typically around 6 in the morning Pacific time. And you'll find that at HartmannReport.com. It's free. You can sign up for it. There's no ads, whatever. But also over at ThomHartmann.com, we have a video every week for the supporters of our program. And the one this week is about how Wisconsin is trying to remove, in fact, they just got permission from their Supreme Court to remove 188,000 people from the voting rolls because they haven't voted in 4 years. This highlights the importance of getting to know who is your state representative, who is your state senator, and communicating with them regularly. It's all over at HartmannReport.com and ThomHartmann.com. Okay, two quick things, and then I'm going to pick up your phone calls. Number one, Kathy Griffin has revealed that she has lung cancer, and she's going to have half of her left lung removed. And she has never smoked, but she was a comedian, and I don't know about those clubs these days, but I know back in the day they were always filled with terrible smoke. But other people can get lung cancer as well, even if they've never smoked. There's a whole bunch of other factors and variables and whatnot. But I tweeted to her this morning, you know, best wishes and you know, that you're one of the bravest among us. And she really is, Kathy Griffin. I have so much respect for her as a professional, as a performer, and also as a human being. So, and our Geeky Science, this is absolutely fascinating. This was published in the Neurology Journal, which is a journal of the American Academy of Neurology. It was published July 28th, just last week. And from the study, this is from Dr. Walter Willett, MD, PhD of Harvard University. He said, there is mounting evidence suggesting flavonoids. Now, let me pause right there. The flavonoids are, by and large, the bright-colored compounds in our food. The things that make blueberry blue and blackberries black and sweet potatoes orange and lettuce green, and you know, all these colors, okay? He says there's mounting evidence suggesting flavonoids are powerhouses when it comes to preventing your thinking skills from declining as you get older. Our results are exciting because they show that making simple changes to your diet can help prevent cognitive decline. What they found is that people who eat a diet that includes at least half a serving every day of foods high in flavonoids, strawberries, oranges, peppers, apples, stuff like that, have a 20% lower risk of cognitive decline. They specifically call out flavones and anthocyanins, which are the brightest colors that you'll find in these foods. And they said for long-term brain health, and they say it's never too late to start, because we saw, this is a quote from the physician who did the study, because we saw those protective relationships, whether people were consuming the flavonoids in their diet 20 years ago, or if they started incorporating them more recently. And this is just, and then they note, one limitation of the study is that some participants may not recall perfectly what they ate. Well, that's the people who weren't eating the flavonoids. Their brains weren't quite working as well. Anyway, we'll be back with your phone calls for the next half hour. Stick around. We'll be right back.
You're listening to the Thom Hartmann Program. Call 202-808-9925.
Exposing the con in conservative. Thom Hartmann with you. Pick up your calls right after this.
Our book today is Jailbreak Out of History by Butch Lee. This is from the first chapter, Jailbreak Out of History, Harriet. Focus on Amazons, about why we deal with real women as myths, girls who never really existed. Yet and again, all are around us, and that we can't bring ourselves to see. Because seeing through white men's eyes is about non-vision of ourselves. So let's deal with a real Amazon. Think about Harriet Tubman. Take 6 months. In fact, take a year and think. Break it on down. What does it mean to be the most famous new African woman in U.S. history? What does it mean to be stuck in that lie? What's the meaning of being famous while being hidden and disfigured and dissed? Let's jailbreak Harriet Tubman out of white history and place her in Amazon and new African, her story, her people's story. Harriet Tubman's life is a live weapon placed in our minds, showing us what it means to be an Amazon, which is why the capitalist patriarchy has forbidden us to touch on it for so long. In this, maybe for the first time, we can see Amazons as a future force in a clash of peoples and nations, not as myths, but as players in the whole difficult course of world politics. We can also appreciate the bittersweet tang of reality as the peeling away of layers of propaganda and disfigurement which have hidden Harriet from us exposes how much we assume and how little we have known. New African women have already pointed out the significant pattern of Harriet's exclusion. Cultural critic Bell Hooks said recently, I mean, if we could recover Ida B. Wells and Harriet Tubman to the extent that we've recovered, say, Zora Neale Hurston, I think that's an important contrast because people want to bury that revolutionary black female history. Historian Deborah Gray White connects Harriet's treatment to a larger pattern in the mainstream history of slavery, in which black women, quote, were reduced to insignificance and largely ignored, end quote. In examining the influential historian Stanley Elkins, she points out, quote, that Elkins seems to omit women altogether was accentuated by his description of slaves whom he identified as part of an American underground, those who never succumbed to Samboism. Among those mentioned were Gabriel, who led the revolt of 1820, Denmark Vesey, leading spirit of the 1822 plot at Charleston, and Nat Turner, an omission conspicuous by its absence, was Harriet Tubman. If Elkins had really been thinking of slaves of both sexes, he would hardly have forgotten this woman, who became widely known as the Moses of her people, end of quote. Patriarchal capitalisms, which only want Amazons to be exotic myths about forgotten ages, have hidden Harriet Tubman in her own fame. They both trivialize and exceptionalize her. These are tools of oppressor culture. The stripped down and censored version of her life is told in elementary schools all over the U.S. empire. So much so that everyone thinks they know her story already, although they don't. Harriet Tubman was born in slavery in Maryland around 1820. She escaped to the North when she was 29, but kept returning secretly to the South again and again to help other slaves escape. For this, she became known as Moses. True statements. But by limiting her, it becomes clever propaganda against her and against her people. Where patriarchy has been unable to deny that women do significant things, it denies the full meaning of what we do by trivializing them. Mary Daly, feminist philosopher, traces the enormity of what patriarchy has done to us. In ancient Greece, the goddess Hecate, also known as Artemis and Diana, was sometimes known as Trivia and represented by a three-faced statue. That was also the name used for the intersection of three paths, which in many old cultures were the sites of mystical power. She writes in Gynecology, quote, in light of the cosmic significance of the term trivia as the crossing of the three roads and of the goddess who bears this name, contemporary meaning of the term in English should be examined. The English term, which according to Merriam-Webster is derived from the Latin trivium or crossroads, is defined as common, ordinary, commonplace, of little worth or importance, insignificant, flimsy, minor, or slight. Of course, according to patriarchal values, that which is commonplace is of little worth. For in a competitive hierarchical society, scarcity is intrinsic to worth. Thus, gold is more important than fresh air, and consequently, we are forced to live in a world in which gold is easier to find than pure air. End quote. So to trivialize Harriet Tubman, the capitalist patriarchy pictures her as an idealized woman by their definition, who makes a life of helping others. Thus, her deeds are squeezed into women's assigned maternal role as nurturer, helper, and rescuer of men, who then go on to do important things. But Harriet wasn't repping Mother Teresa. She wasn't even any kind of civilian at all. She was a combatant, a guerrilla, a warrior carrying pistol and rifle, fighting in her people's long war for freedom, a war that rocked the foundations of African society, American society, and that has never gone away. Think about what it means to be called Moses, which was the code name other new Africans gave her, and which became Harriet's famous warrior name in the anti-slavery underground. When we check out the Bible, we can see that Moses was a ruthless visionary, someone who forced the boldest changes and risks upon his people so that they could survive, who led them out of captivity. To put it simply, Moses was a leader in a time of war. So too was Harriet Tubman. The book Jailbreak Out of History by Butch Lee.
Change starts with you. You can be calling your Democratic or Republican representatives to let them know what you think by calling 202-224-3121. It's the Capitol switchboard. It'll get you right through to them. So for our Thom Hartmann Insider videotape that is over, or videotape, YouTube, whatever you want to call it, private video that's available over at thomhartmann.com. I'm talking this week about Donald Trump just completely giving in to Erdogan of Turkey, the president of Turkey, the dictator of Turkey now. this theory that Jared Kushner okayed the killing, at least the capture, perhaps the killing of Jamal Khashoggi, and to Mohammed bin Salman, and that Erdogan has the tape of it, and that when he called up Donald Trump a couple weeks ago and said, I want you to pull out of Syria and give me those Kurds so I can kill them and take that land, that he did it because Erdogan threatened him. And then Erdogan comes to the United States, a week or two later and gets a whole state dinner thing. Check it all out. It's over at ThomHartmann.com. I think you'll find it fascinating. And welcome back. Thom Hartmann here with you. We had a caller earlier today, by the way, who was going off on, well, the CDC is not behind the PCR test and the FDA and blah-de-blah-de-blah. Tip of the hat to Sue Nethercutt, who does our newsletter every day, and sent a note to Sean, who shared this with me, over at factcheck.org. Viral posts misrepresent CDC announcement on COVID-19 PCR test. And basically what this caller who had called into my show earlier today, and I blew him off ultimately, was blithering about, and I knew it had to be something that came off Facebook, or some other social media. Usually it's Facebook. Is that they're, I'm not even going to go into the details. Just, if somebody starts going off at you about the CDC and the COVID tests, just tell them, look at factcheck.org. All your hysteria has been completely debunked. This is more of that kind of crap that, anyway. Ron in Berrien Springs, Michigan. Hey, Ron, what's on your mind today?
Tom, this isn't going to go to your earlier point, the American Taliban. But do you agree with me that we owe our generals and admirals, Special General Milley, that they did not go along with Trump and do a coup d'etat? So in other words, our delicate balance of democracy was held together by generals and their decisions. Now, if we agree with that, whether we agree with that or not, I contend this is a very good time for young people to go into the military. The military is being purged of white supremacists. They started that when they had to check on the National Guard that were going to go into the Capitol to defend it. And now is the time, and again, for national service. But isn't it better for our people to be in training, to be trained in weapons and other skills that are vitally needed, whether we win or lose the election? Do you understand what I'm talking about, Tom? Maybe I do. Because here's another point. If it comes to that, if we're in camps, maybe some of our kinfolk, our friends who joined the military and are still in there, can help us.
Well, I wouldn't.
The long term.
I would be reluctant to suggest that people should join the military because they can learn how to kill or do hand-to-hand combat. But I do think that having some form of national service, which could include, for those people who would like to do it, the military, is broadly speaking a good thing. And I think an all-volunteer army is broadly speaking a bad thing. And it's one of the reasons that, there's a huge debate around having an all-volunteer army or not. And many countries don't have all-volunteer armies for the very reason that that's how you end up with, an army that actually threatens the country itself. Because then you get this insular, culture of we're on this side and the civilians are on that side. And that's not a good or a healthy thing. So, it's an important point, Ron. It's a really important
Tom, your show is broadcast to our military forces. I'd like to have some of them call in with how they feel.
Yeah, by and large, they hear a replay. They don't hear it live. But, they'll hear the conversation. Ron, thank you for the call. Melanie in Bullhead, Arizona. Hey, Melanie, what's up?
Thank you for taking my call, Tom. I just wanted to share a story with you. I am the mother of a 56-year-old developmentally disabled adult who lives in a group home in California. Mm-hmm. After 14 months, he was finally allowed to go back to work. He was in a van with 4 other adults, and they would go from park to park with a power washer and clean the bathrooms. Mm-hmm. On Monday night, the lady who runs the home had a discussion with the driver, and the driver freely volunteered that she was not vaccinated. So she calls me and says, how do you feel about this? And I said, well, I'm not comfortable. How do you feel? She said, I'm not comfortable either. I have a house full of clients and employees that I need to keep safe, and this is not safe. So we got my son on the phone, and we talked with him and explained to him what was going on. And I said to him, what do you think you should do? And lo and behold, he surprised me. He said, I need to quit my job.
Wow.
I said, that's a wise decision, son. I'm very proud of you. That's a very wise decision. I said, this keeps you safe and everybody else safe. This was on Monday. So Wednesday, I get a phone call. He's in quarantine. One of the other adults that were on that bus, not the driver, but another client, has COVID, and he is now in quarantine.
Oh, my. I'm sorry to hear that, Melanie.
I don't know how this was allowed to happen, and I'm going to deal with this. But we were talking last night, and I was telling him, I said, do you know what the governor of Florida is doing? He's telling the schools that if you're going to require kids to mask, we're not going to give you any money so you can keep the schools open. Do you know what my son said? He goes, Mom, that's stupid.
Your son is smarter than Ron DeSantis.
My 56-year-old developmentally disabled son is smarter and has more of a grasp on this COVID situation than most of our politicians do.
Yeah, at least our Republican politicians.
Yes,
said.
Exactly. Yeah. Just wanted to share that with you.
Well, thank you, Melanie. That's a great
Unbelievable.
story. Yeah, it really is. And I wish you the very best and your son the very best. I hope it all works out. Thank you for the call. Ronnie in New Berlin, Washington. Hey, Ronnie, what's up? Or excuse me, Wisconsin, not Washington, Wisconsin. Hey, Ronnie.
Yeah. Hey, just a update and a piggyback from an earlier caller. She had called saying that she had polio earlier in her life.
Mm-hmm.
And I've told you about my mom. I see her every Sunday at church. She's 87 now, refusing to get vaccinated. She had polio when she was 20. And I reminded her of all that and still adamant not to. It's just crazy that, I mean...
Does she watch Fox News, Ronnie?
I'm sure, yeah. She doesn't have any internet. And then our local paper has always been more of a right-wing slant to it.
Mm-hmm.
But I think that she doesn't even read anything in the paper that has a headline of COVID. Because last week I mentioned, the Delta variant is it's running rampant and it's way more contagious. And she was like, what?
Mm-hmm.
What's that? So she's not reading it in the paper. And I don't know, maybe Tucker Carlson isn't talking about the Delta variant. But
Probably
it's
not.
So frustrating. I mean, she had polio. We don't have polio. And, of course, then her argument was there's still polio. There's not a lot, but there's still polio. And I'm like, yeah, because a few places don't vaccinate, because they think, and my husband is in Rotary, and that's Rotary's #1 thing worldwide to get rid of polio. And those two nations that aren't doing it, it's because they think that the world is trying to sterilize their children.
Right.
So that's why Afghanistan and Pakistan don't do it. But for my mom who lived through polio and who now she had it in her legs, so she doesn't walk very far. She gets tired fast. She still has the repercussions from that. And she just thinks the virus is fake and the vaccine is untested. She is so far up the Republican wormholes. It's frustrating.
It's got to be incredibly difficult. Ronnie, thanks for sharing the story with us. I'm sorry to hear it, but thank you very much. Dave in Federal Way, Washington. Hey, Dave, what's up?
Hey, Tom, real quick, I just want to say that when we removed the Taliban government back in 2001, they started a shadow government right away. The problem is... Just like Trump is doing. The nature of their shadow government is to, because they knew the threat with a democratic Afghanistan was the people might be happy, right?
Mm-hmm.
So what they did is they started a shadow government to see how they could replicate all that stuff without, conforming to democratic norms. And yes, it's exactly like the Trump administration.
So they're rehearsing to pretend that they're a democratic government and figuring out how to corrupt a democratic government the same way Trump tried to corrupt our government.
Yes, and in Afghanistan, the problem is okay, it's all based on their interpretation of Islam. I mean, and to call the burden is on the government because, all right, one government official, let's pick one, Karzai, for instance, he does something un-Islamic. I mean, it condemns the whole government. You know,
I get it. I get it, Dave. Yeah. And they're playing the same political game that the Republicans are in the United States. Dave, thanks for the call. Patsy in Arroyo Grande, California. Or is it Grande? Patsy?
Grande, yeah.
Grande. Hey, what's up?
I was born in 1940, so I'm 81. So for the first 15 years of my life, we didn't have a polio vaccine. I had friends that got it. I had one friend that died from it. But, you know, our parents, I think, were from this World War II generation, and they had this, like, we're all in it together attitude. Mm-hmm. So, you know, if the public health came by and said you had to do this and that, you know, close the pools. For some reason or other, they had an idea back then that water transmitted the polio. So, you know, they closed the pools. They wouldn't let us, you know, play in sprinklers, you know, stuff like that. So when the vaccine came along, everybody was just more than happy to, you know, send their kid in to get the polio vaccine. And I had a friend who actually got it in his face, and he got that turtle face that Mitch McConnell has. And he seems to have, he grew up with the same
lack of empathy.
Yeah, Mitch McConnell had polio, childhood polio. Huh. Yeah, I looked it up, yeah.
Yeah.
And, but it was the same turtle face thing, but he also grew up with that same lack of empathy that I wondered if it affected his brain.
Huh. Yeah, that might be a little more of a stretch, but although it is a neurological disease, I mean, that's how polio attacks is through the nerves. Amazing. Patsy, thank you. Thank you for sharing your story with us. What a fascinating day. It's 46 minutes past the hour. It's the Thom Hartmann Program, the place where despair is not an option. We'll be right back.
You're listening to Thom Hartmann. Visit ThomHartmann.com for audio and video archives.
Picking up your phone calls, your thoughts in just a moment. And welcome back. Chaz in Lakewood, Washington. Hey, Chaz, what's up?
Buenos dias, mi amigo.
Dankeschön.
Hey, can I give you guys a quick note on the word republic before I get into my little rant?
Please.
Okay, look, the word republic just means we're not a monarchy. If you want to be compared to republics, you're also asking to be compared to the Republic of Cuba, People's Republic of China, the Socialist Republic of Vietnam, the Islamic Republic of Afghanistan, the Islamic Republic of Iran, or the legacy of the Union of Soviet Socialist Republics. Spasiba, comrade.
Right. Or the Republic of North Korea.
Thank you. I think it's time for a COVID-19 summary perspective with your indulgence, Professor.
Go for it.
First time I ever heard about it was on your program. Even then, you considered the possibility of grave foreboding, and that was 2 years ago. We could have been past this pandemic. The longer this proliferates, the more chance of variants, the longer our economy is dampened, the longer the world lives in a dark age. Even if COVID doesn't kill you, the long-term effects will... We don't know how long it lasts, or you could pass it on to someone immunocompromised and never know.
Right.
Over 1 billion people are fully vaccinated. At least 2 billion have had at least one shot. I was vaccinated last February, and my race hasn't changed. Bill Gates hasn't stopped by, and reptile skin isn't bursting out of me. The back side effect is mild and short term. Yet. The back side effect is mild and short term, usually a day. But the side effect of COVID is death. Did I get that all right, Tom?
Yeah, you did, Chaz. And there was an article yesterday, and again, this is given how there are so many men who are driving this anti-vaccine train. Literally every single caller who's ever called into this show with some anti-vaccine hysteria has been a man. This study that found that 1/3 of men who got symptomatic COVID have erectile dysfunction as a consequence of it because of the blood clots, you know. And
I wish I'd have gotten that before I had my 2 kids. Now,
yeah,
Tom,
they actually gave it. It actually has a name now. It's called COVID penis. It's amazing.
It sounds like something you would get on a Chinese menu.
You need to tell that to every. Oh God! You need to tell that to every man who is an anti-vaxxer. It's just incredible.
And I sent you an article about anti-mask backlash. About now, people are getting disgruntled that because other people aren't getting. I went to the commissary yesterday, and the mask mandate has been restored. And I'm sure I'm not the only one that's suffering with this. But yeah, people who just choose not to wear masks are making this longer and worse.
Yeah, commissary. You in the military?
Yes, well, retired military, yeah. 4 in the Marine Corps, and then 16 in the National Guard.
Therefore, all the foreign languages?
We are a global nation, Tom. I really do believe that what makes America the most amazing country in history is the fact that we have, with some success, been able to incorporate other voices. I think that I've said it in a college class. If the room is full of white males, we don't have any new ideas. We need new ideas.
Yeah. The great melting pot was the phrase that I grew up with, and I think it's a good thing. It was always presented as a good thing. Chaz, thank you. Nice to hear from you, and fascinating to get to know you better. Thank you. It's 10 minutes before the hour. We'll be back with more of your calls in just a moment. It's the Thom Hartmann Program, Viagra for your brain. And if you get COVID, you're going to need it. We'll be right back. Missed my opening rant today? It's usually published over at HartmannReport.com, where you can read it and share it with your friends for free. Check it out, HartmannReport.com. Well, the Confederacy continues to live. Governor Tate Reeves, the governor of Mississippi, just signed a proclamation making April the Confederate Heritage Month in Mississippi. That's kind of the bad news. The good news is that it didn't get published on the state's websites. It got published over on Facebook, where there's a good contingent of racists and neo-Confederates to begin with. But what does this say about America, that a part of the country that literally was a police state, a fascist police state, there was no democracy left by 1861 in the South. It was completely controlled by a few thousand families who owned these massive plantations. And in my little riff that's over at ThomHartmann.com for the supporters of our program, I go through some of the details of it. Just the sad, sad history of the South. It is really worth checking out. It's over at ThomHartmann.com. And welcome back. Thom Hartmann here with you. Israel in Chandler, Arizona. Hey, Israel, what's up?
Hey, good morning, Tom. I just wanted to add my 2 cents on all the commentary on shadow governments. I think and I don't think it's a good idea for us. Number one, it's a technical reason. The other 3 English-speaking countries are parliamentary systems.
Correct.
The outsider party, the opposition, had to be ready to take over government on virtually a moment's notice within a matter of weeks of an election if
You're absolutely right. In the UK, I think it is, elections have to happen within 6 weeks of Parliament being dissolved, or something like that. It's a relatively short period of time. It's probably the case in other countries, too.
The other point that I think is much more important is for us, we elect a new administration to come in and administer the government, not change the laws, not change the policies. Any laws that are in place, when that new administration come in, must forcefully administer the letter and the spirit of the law just because they don't like it. If they don't like it, propose a new law, and we'll vote on that. But we vote in new administrations, not new governments.
That's a good point.
That's a fundamental difference.
Israel, thank you. I learned something from you today. I appreciate that. It's.
Well, you spark a lot of thinking every day.
Well, thank you. But I got to tell you, it's, hanging out here with some of the smartest people on earth is such a privilege. Israel, thank you very much. Jerry in Winston-Salem, North Carolina, you are on the air, Jerry.
Hi, Tom. Going back to the COVID, little misinformation. Just to remind everybody, a doctor, a PhD with an MD, has spent a lot of time and money getting that certificate from the state they're in. All states are different, but yet similar, but two things. A doctor that wants to falsify a death certificate has no incentive to do that other than losing his license to practice. And also, they're mandated by federal law. Any vaccine that has a reaction that is abnormal, that information must be turned over to the CDC. So the reports at the Centers for Disease Control is only showing 3 cases of the J&J of blood clots, and that's it.
Right. Out of millions and millions of doses.
Before you start talking about something that involves misinformation, it's just not in the doctor's playbook to start falsifying records.
Yeah, you're right, Jerry, and I think it's really important that we have some trust in our medical community. Jerry, thank you very much for the call. I mean, you know, like I said, people get sick, and what do? They call the doctor, and now they're calling me to trash the doctors. It makes no sense. Raven in Medford, Oregon. Hey, Raven, what's up?
Hi, Tom. How are you? So, I'm a Navy guy that was forced to wear pink during the AIDS pandemic.
Really? In the Navy?
Yeah. I was going to talk before, but you didn't have enough time.
By way of identifying you as a person who had AIDS, or as a person who was gay?
As a person who had AIDS.
Wow. I'm sorry to hear that.
So I can tell you, well, I would still do my service all over again to the country, not to a political group, but to the country and the people of the country.
Right.
But what I wanted to say was that as a 35-year-old survivor of, like, the first, I guess you could say it was the first modern pandemic, and being forced to wear pink and everything I went through is ridiculous. The non-vaxxers complained that this is a violation of their rights if their company orders them to get vaccinated, because as a person who went through that and who was part of a group who was afraid to give their SSI numbers because of talks of camps, no, I know what a violation of rights is.
Yeah, and this ain't that.
This is not even, this is so far from that. This is so far from what I was forced to experience myself. That is ridiculous.
Raven, I have to run, but thank you for sharing a compelling story with me and with our listeners. I truly appreciate it. Thank you. We'll be back tomorrow, same time, same channel, at the same. And in the meantime, don't forget, democracy is not a spectator sport. It requires all of us, you, me, all of us, to get active, to participate, to show up, and not just to vote. We have to be ongoing active. So get out there, get active, tag you're it. We'll see you tomorrow. Have a great afternoon.
You've been listening to Thom Hartmann. For audio and video archives, visit thomhartmann.com.
These companies support the Thom Hartmann Program. They are HelloFresh, the #1 meal kit delivery service. More information at hellofresh.com, code TOM. CB Distillery for sleeping and pain relief. More info at cbdistillery.com, code TOM. Dinovite, only the best all-natural pet supplements. More info at dinovite.com. Annie's Kit Clubs, creativity delivered right to your door. More info at annieskitclubs.com/Tom. Wild Alaskan Company, delicious, sustainably sourced seafood delivered right to your door. More information at wildalaskancompany.com/Tom. And Mack Weldon, reinventing men's basics. More info at mackweldon.com/Tom.
We say fight back!
These companies support the Thom Hartmann Program. They are HelloFresh, the #1 meal kit delivery service. More information at HelloFresh.com, code TOM. CB Distillery for sleeping and pain relief. More info at cbdistillery.com, code TOM. Dinovite, only the best